on the literal day of my beloved son's 6th birthday. His kindergarten homeroom teacher quietly pulled me aside into a secluded corner. Chenchen has been openly claiming to everyone that your actual biological younger brother is his real father, and that you are just a live-in male nanny hired to take care of him. I merely forced a tight smile, trying to brush it off with a casual explanation. Oh, the kid probably just watched too many cartoon shows, and is completely talking nonsense. Yet the moment I turned around, I secretly ordered a DNA paternity test. The official medical report arrived explicitly stating zero biological relationship. But what truly violently pierced my eyes was that one specific line of tiny text at the bottom. It is highly recommended to perform a close relative kinship evaluation. That very night, I overheard my unfaithful wife panting heavily in the guest bedroom while pinning my own brother beneath her. The absolute second I look at that hideous scar on his abdomen, I get completely totally nauseated, dog. How could I ever possibly be in the mood to touch him? That exact scar she despised was the permanent trauma I received from blocking a lethal blade to save her life. The moment my own biological mother found out I intended to file for divorce, she brutally slapped me across the face. What more do you want? The marriage is already dead and locked in. It turns out my entire blood-related family knew the absolute truth all along. She was carrying my younger brother's illegitimate child from the very start. Marrying a disposable tool like me was solely to use me as an absolute human shield. Making me absorb every single incoming attack and hidden blade meant for the true love of his life. Meanwhile, the very second my true biological daughter was born, they heartlessly dumped her into the freezing sub-zero snow. 6 agonizing years have fully passed. The exact millisecond I finally tracked down her current whereabouts. My hands clamped onto the steering wheel, trembling in absolute uncontrollable shock. This time, I am officially abandoning every single one of them. I don't give a damn about anyone else, I only want my real daughter back. This entire sickening web of deception all ignited from a single quiet warning from my son's kindergarten teacher. That specific afternoon, I arrived at the school gates as usual to pick up my son Chenchen after class. The little guy was officially turning 6 years old this year, enrolled in the senior class of a prestigious international academy downtown, widely dubbed the Cradle of the Elite. I had personally raised him with my own 2 hands since the day he was born, watching him transform from a tiny wrinkled infant into the perfectly healthy porcelain-skinned, an absolutely adorable child that everyone constantly showered with endless praise. The profound love I harbored for him was an absolute undeniable reality. A fierce, unconditional love that was completely etched into the deepest depths of my soul. I'm Chenchen's dad, Could you please hold on for just a brief moment? The literal second I clasped my fingers around Chenchen's tiny hand. His main homeroom instructor, Teacher Lee, hurriedly marched over to intercept us. A highly polished, perfectly professional smile was plastered across her face. Yet her anxious eyes clearly betrayed a deep sense of hesitant, awkward discomfort. I gently directed Chenchen to go over and play on the nearby playground slide, waiting until he was completely out of earshot before asking Teacher Lee what was wrong. Did Chenchen end up causing some kind of chaotic trouble in class today? Oh no, definitely not. Chenchen is actually an incredibly well-behaved student. Gag. Teacher Lee quickly shook her head in reassurance, carefully weighing and overanalyzing every single word before speaking. It's just, lately the child has been frequently bringing up specific details about his home life to his classmates and staff. And regarding the specific nature of what he's been claiming, our entire staff feels it's absolutely vital for you to monitor the child's psychological development. My heart instantly skipped a violent, terrifying beat. What exactly did he say to everyone? Teacher Lee instinctively dropped her voice to a soft, hushed whisper, seemingly terrified that the little guy might overhear her words. Chenchen explicitly stated that Pei Xinghui is his actual biological father. And as for you, he referred to you as nothing more than a paid male nanny hired to look after him. It felt as if a devastating explosive device had instantly detonated inside my skull, leaving my mind a complete blank. I stood there entirely frozen in absolute jaw-dropping shock for several agonizing seconds, before desperately forcing out a strained, incredibly hollow smile. You know how young kids are at that age. He probably just watched too many dramatic cartoons and is talking absolute nonsense. We sincerely hope that's the absolute extent of it. Teacher Lee gave a slow, sympathetic nod. But we still strongly urge you to keep a very close eye on his behavior at home. During the silent drive back to our house, the interior of the car was completely engulfed in a suffocating dead silence. I cautiously glanced through the rearview mirror, tracking Chenchen as he played with his toy car in the back seat. His head was completely bowed down, making cute little engine noises with his mouth as he rolled the vehicle back and forth. That exact image of pure, unadulterated childhood innocence caused the calm facade I had meticulously maintained in front of the teacher to completely shatter into dust. Pei Xinghui, my very own biological younger brother. How on earth could such a vile, utterly preposterous claim ever cross my son's lips? I took a deep, stabilizing breath, doing everything in my power to keep my voice sounding completely casual and calm. Hey Chenchen, Daddy wants to ask you a quick question. Chenchen didn't even bother to look up from his toy. What is it? Why exactly did you tell your school teacher that Uncle Pei Xinghui is actually your real biological father? If he's your real father, then who am I to you? Chenchen casually swapped the toy car from his left hand over to his right, answering with complete unbothered nonchalance. Because Mommy told me so. Mommy said that Uncle Xinghui is my true biological daddy, and that I need to be a good boy and take care of him when I grow up. My grip on the steering wheel instantly tightened with overwhelming force, my fingertips turning entirely ice cold. A sudden violent wave of sheer dread surged from the soles of my feet straight to my brain. Despite it being the dead of summer, I felt as if I had been brutally plunged into a sub-zero frozen abyss. Then, what about me? I could actively hear my own vocal cords trembling in absolute terror. Chenchen finally lifted his head, staring directly at me with his large, wide, innocent eyes. Yet the words that casually spilled from his mouth pierced me like a jagged blade. Mommy told me that you used to have a real daughter of your own, but she died the exact second she was born. And she also said that you can never ever have any biological babies of your own again. So my real daddy generously gave me to you so you wouldn't be lonely. The moment those words left his mouth, his tiny lips instantly began to quiver uncontrollably, and his eyes filled to the brim with pooling tears. Whimpering with a deeply distressed, shaky voice, he cried, "But I desperately want my real biological daddy to... I want to live happily with my real daddy and mommy together." A sharp, deafening screech of burning tires violently pierced the entire street. I slammed on the brakes with brutal force, pulling the car erratically over to the curb. The sheer kinetic momentum violently threw my entire upper body forward. Before the seatbelt brutally snapped me back into the leather seat, my vision immediately began to go black in dizzying waves, and an aggressive, high-pitched ringing buzzed relentlessly inside my ears. I actually had a biological daughter, and my own brother Pei Xinghui was Chenchen's real father. An absolute colossal wave of pure absurdity and visceral horror felt like two invisible, demonic hands tightly suffocating my bare throat, making it physically impossible for me to draw a single breath of air. I desperately forced myself to stabilize my erratic breathing, yet my vocal cords were still trembling with absolute terror. Chenchen, all of these specific things. When exactly did your mommy tell you all of this? Chenchen was visibly startled by my sudden aggressive emergency brake. Sniffling softly, he paused to think for a brief second before replying. Last week when you went out of town on that business trip? When Uncle Xinghui came over to our house to sleep with mommy, they told me. They even strictly ordered me to never repeat a single word to you, saying that it was our special little secret. I felt as if an atomic bomb had completely detonated inside my brain, shattering my sanity. My stomach violently churned with intense nausea, and a bitter torrent of pure acid rushed straight up into my throat. I clenched my jaw with agonizing force, my fingernails digging deeply into my bare palms, summoning every single microscopic ounce of human strength left in my system, just to prevent myself from completely breaking down right then and there. I didn't drive back to our marital home. Instead, I violently spun the steering wheel around to reverse our direction, slamming the gas pedal flat against the floorboards, as we rocketed straight toward the city's most authoritative elite DNA paternity testing headquarters. The agonizing wait for the official results felt like a literal never-ending century. I sat completely paralyzed on a cold metal bench in the sterile corridor, blankly watching the endless sea of strangers passing back and forth, while my thoughts spiraled into a chaotic, unmitigated disaster zone. Vivid memories of Qin Muyan's blissfully radiant smile during every prenatal checkup flashed before my eyes. I remembered her shedding tragic mourning tears as she claimed our other twin was severely underdeveloped and had been completely reabsorbed by her body in the womb. I remembered the exact day I took a lethal blade to the torso to save her life. The moment she finally wheeled out of the delivery room, cradling Chenchen with tear-stained eyes as she whispered softly to me, "Look, Yunzhou, look at our beautiful son, he looks exactly like you." But looking back at everything now, every single syllable that spilled from her mouth back then was actually littered with glaring red flags. But I was so thoroughly blinded by my own naive, toxic version of domestic bliss that I completely failed to see the obvious truth staring me in the face. "Mr. Pei Yunzhou, your official laboratory DNA analysis is ready for collection." The sterile monotone voice of the clinic receptionist instantly dragged my racing mind back to reality. I practically lunged forward to rip the sealed brown file packet directly out of her hands, my fingers trembling so violently with sheer dread that it took me several desperate, clumsy attempts just to tear open the secure adhesive seal. A single agonizingly thin piece of medical paper. Yet in this precise microsecond, it carried the suffocating weight of a literal mountain range. Biological paternity relationship is non-existent. Those specific, devastating black words burned into my retinas like a white-hot branding iron, brutally searing themselves directly into the deepest tissue of my bleeding heart. But right underneath that crushing declaration sat a tiny, easily missed line of text. Genetic alignment matrix significantly exceeds standard baseline variables, It is highly recommended to perform a close relative kinship evaluation. Significantly exceeds the baseline close relative kinship. The absolute last remaining shred of desperate hope I harbored was instantly crushed into microscopic dust. I completely collapsed back into the plastic corridor chair, paralyzed. The official medical report slipping completely from my numb, unfeeling fingers, as it fluttered helplessly downward before resting quietly on the cold linoleum floor. The suppressed trauma from 6 years ago came violently roaring back, reeking of raw copper and heavy blood. Back then, Chin Muyan was rapidly approaching her official delivery date, and the two of us had dressed up to attend a high-profile corporate charity gala together. She was elegantly draped in a loose-fitting custom designer maternity gown, her arm delicately looped through mine, as she flashed a flawless, picture-perfect smile to the hovering paparazzi. The entire catastrophic nightmare unfolded in the blink of an eye. An individual heavily disguised in standard catering staff uniform abruptly broke from the crowd, his hand tightly gripping a blindingly reflective razor-sharp hunting dagger, as he made a lethal direct beeline straight toward her exposed stomach. Without a single microsecond of hesitation, I violently spun my entire frame around, locking her safely behind my own back to act as a human shield. An unmitigated explosion of blinding agony erupted directly from my lower abdomen. I forced my eyes downward, tracking the solid handle protruding completely from my gut, while an endless torrent of deep crimson blood surged aggressively from the wound, violently staining the pure white hemline of her pristine gown. Yunzhou. Her high-pitched, piercing shriek gradually faded into a distant echo as my consciousness slipped away. I was urgently rushed into emergency trauma surgery, remembering absolutely nothing before the darkness except visceral pain and her tear-swollen eyes. By the time I finally regained consciousness inside the intensive care unit, she had already completed labor. She sat by my bedside, cradling a newborn male infant, weeping tears of apparent joy. Yunzhou, look at our beautiful son. Isn't he just the most precious thing you've ever seen? I was so completely physically incapacitated back then that I couldn't even form words, only able to gaze at her with absolute adoration, staring at the tiny infant cradled protectively in her arms, my entire soul completely overflowing with a profound, unmitigated sense of pure euphoria. But I vividly remembered her very first prenatal scan, where the ultrasound report clearly and undeniably specified a twin gestation. She later spun a tragic narrative to explain it away, claiming that the other fetus suffered from severe developmental failure and was naturally reabsorbed by her body in the womb. She assured me the doctors called it a highly common medical anomaly, so I never questioned her words or dug any deeper, chalking the whole heartbreaking loss up to a cruel twist of divine fate. It turns out it wasn't divine fate at all, but a calculated demonic conspiracy. If the truth is exactly what it looks like, if the twin pregnancy she carried actually belonged entirely to my brother Pei Xinghui, then why the hell did she meticulously manipulate me into believing one baby was naturally absorbed, and where is the other? More importantly, where on earth is this biological daughter that Chen just spoke of? A chaotic storm of dark, suffocating enigmas tightly wrapped around my throat like toxic vines, constricting with such brutal force that I could barely draw a single breath of air. I aggressively yanked out my smartphone, my fingers trembling uncontrollably as I dialed Chin Muyan's number. I needed to confront her right this instant. I demanded that she look me in the eye and give me a raw verbal explanation herself. The dial tone rang endlessly into the void for what felt like an eternity. But absolutely no one picked up. Right at the exact millisecond, I teetered on the absolute precipice of a total psychotic break, just as I was about to slam my foot on the gas and storm her corporate office directly. A breaking news flash suddenly forcefully pushed its way onto my illuminated display screen. Breaking a catastrophic, highly organized armed kidnapping has just detonated at the provincial capital golf course. A chaotic violent shootout is currently active on the scene, with an initial casualty count of 1 confirmed dead and 16 critically injured. The headline was absolutely horrific, sending a cold shiver straight down my spine. Directly beneath the text was a shaky, heavily pixelated video captured by a terrified eyewitness on the ground. I initially had zero mental bandwidth to pay attention to standard media gossip, but the exact individuals flashing across the frame caused the literal blood in my veins to instantaneously turn to solid ice. A lone woman, completely drenched from head to toe in fresh splattered crimson blood, was engaged in a savage life-or-death physical brawl against several heavily armed criminals. She was wearing a highly sophisticated high-end designer gown, which was now thoroughly ruined, caked in thick mud and grisly bloodstains. Her raven black hair hung in wild sweat-soaked tangles across her pale forehead, her eyes flashing with a terrifying predator-like lethal precision, unleashing calculated, hyper-violent combat maneuvers, like a bloodthirsty Asura clawing her way straight out of hell, and that terrifying woman was none other than my wife, Chin Muyan. In my entire life, I had never witnessed this monstrous, lethal side of her character. Her laser-focused absolute attention. Attention. Every single ounce of her unhinged violent madness was channeled entirely toward one singular coordinate on that field. Right in the dead center of the chaotic crowd. Sat a hostage with a razor-sharp combat knife pressed firmly against his bare throat, my brother, Pei Xinghui. Her gaze remained relentlessly locked onto his body from start to finish, overflowing with agonizing worry and raw panic. Completely prepared to burn the entire world to ash just to secure his safety. Even back when I was brutally taken hostage by ruthless kidnappers with a loaded firearm pressed directly against my temple, teetering on the absolute razor-thin edge between life and death. She had never, not even for a fraction of a second, completely lost her sanity or unraveled like this for me. My grip on my smartphone instantaneously turned ice cold, making it physically impossible to even hold it steady. 1 dead and 16 critically injured. Ikkidao. Is she completely out of harm's way, or is she hurt? That protective instinct violently reflexively hijacked my brain, causing my chest to contract in a sudden excruciating spasm. Even at this absolute rock-bottom moment of betrayal, I was still fundamentally hardwired to worry about her safety. I am honestly a complete, total, unmitigated clown, forcing my shattered psyche into a state of cold composure. I immediately dropped Chen off at my mother's residence, without wasting a single microsecond to explain the situation, and completely ignoring the utterly bewildered expressions on their faces. I spun around, bolted out the front door, and slammed my foot on the gas, racing straight toward the active crime scene. By the absolute second I finally arrived, the entire perimeter had already been completely locked down by heavily armed police. The ground was an absolute chaotic disaster zone of debris, and the stagnant summer air was thoroughly thick with the heavy, nauseating stench of fresh blood, hiding in the shadows just beyond the secure caution tape. I watched from afar as the neutralized corpse of the lead kidnapper was dragged away. There she sat on the stone edge of a concrete planter, completely drenched in crimson fluids. Yet her arms were wrapped like an iron vice around a comatose Pei Xinghui, shielding his body. Her chin was pressed tightly against the crown of his head, sitting completely paralyzed and unmoving, resembling a literal Gothic statue carved out of pure grief, before the emergency ambulances could even pull up to the scene. Her ride-or-die best friend Han Muyu was the absolute first to breach the perimeter. Han Muyu crouched down right beside her shivering frame, extending a plastic water bottle toward her bloodied hands, her voice laced with a highly complex mixture of emotions and a heavy undertone of deep melancholic realization. Yan, back then your lethal blood feuds were actively stacked against you everywhere, solely to guarantee that absolutely no one could ever touch your precious Pei Xinghui. You strategically orchestrated your marriage to that fool Pei Yunzhou, deliberately placing him in the direct line of fire to absorb all the incoming crosshairs. I just never expected that after all these consecutive years, those ruthless syndicates still wouldn't let this ancient vendetta die. In the end, they still successfully tracked down and ambushed your precious Ashing. Pausing for a brief tense moment, Han Muyu finally voiced the burning question that had been plaguing her mind for half a decade. But there's still one massive mystery I've never fully grasped back when the stakes were that lethal. You still managed to successfully deliver both infants to term. Pei Yunzhou was so obsessively deeply infatuated with the concept of having a family. How on earth does he still have zero clue that you were actually carrying a set of fraternal twins? One biological child belonging entirely to him and the other sired completely by Pei Xinghui. Why the hell did you go through such extreme lengths to keep him completely in the dark? Why did you force yourself to permanently abandon your own newborn daughter, just to spin a web of lies and gaslight him into believing that severe postpartum depression completely barred you from ever sharing a bed with him again? You've systematically run this absolute sham of a lie for 6 consecutive years. The strength instantly drained from my knees, making my legs give out, leaving me practically collapsing onto the cold ground. I instinctively, violently clamped my hands over my mouth with absolute force, solely to prevent a raw, blood-curdling shriek from tearing out of my throat. Fraternal twins, simultaneously conceiving children from 2 completely different men. A literal 1 in a million medical anomaly, which meant the absolute instant she finished sleeping with me, she immediately flawlessly turned around and climbed right into my biological younger brother's bed. They had been systematically betraying me and hooking up behind my back from the very beginning. I will painfully remember for the rest of my life how Qin Muyan and I first crossed paths. It was entirely masterminded by my own brother Pei Xinghui, acting as the ultimate matchmaker. He introducing her to me under the innocent guise of his absolute best friend, claiming he merely wanted us to get acquainted. I had carried an unshakable, profound sense of gratitude toward him for years, endlessly thanking my lucky stars for him, allowing me to meet the radiant guiding light of my entire existence. Following that, this billionaire heiress's obsessive devotion toward me became common knowledge worldwide. She aggressively bought out every single digital billboard screen across the entire metropolitan city, looping our romantic couple's portraits on an endless high-profile broadcast, just to violently declare her absolute undying affection to the entire world. During that golden era, strangers on the street would stop me just to offer their smiling congratulations. The moment she learned I had a simple craving for fresh grapes, She effortlessly dropped billions to acquire a massive hyper-luxurious vineyard estate in the city's prime district, arrogantly branding it as the Yunzhou Manor, before wrapping it up as a casual everyday token of her affection for me. As the sole heiress and absolute monarch of the powerful Qin Empire, she used to curl up helplessly against my chest, whispering that she would never tolerate me enduring even a single microsecond of disrespect from anyone. She assured me that even if I officially married into her family, it was a superficial technicality. Within the walls of the Qin Palace, I reigned as the absolute supreme master. Our magnificent wedding ceremony was a world-class century-defining spectacle, every single breathtaking detail broadcasting across international media, solidifying our union as a literal picture-perfect fairy tale that left billions sick with envy. I genuinely, wholeheartedly believed I had finally tracked down my absolute destiny. I convinced myself that every ounce of agonizing trauma from my past was just the tax I paid for this pure ecstasy. But it turns out all of this dazzling, high-profile glamour, this suffocating manufactured affection that kept me heavily intoxicated for 8 years, was a cold, calculated camouflage designed from day one solely to shield her true agenda, to completely protect the only person who actually occupied her heart. She didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second to manipulate me into marriage, ruthlessly throwing me onto the public stage to serve as a high-profile target, forcing me to absorb every single incoming bullet and hidden blade meant for them. Meanwhile, she and the absolute true love of her life, my very own biological younger brother, basked in safety and luxury right behind the fortress wall I had built with my bare flesh and blood. She was vile enough to carry the children of both myself and my brother at the exact same time. And by what right, by what twisted demonic right did she decide to permanently throw away my biological daughter? My eyes locked onto those two monstrous individuals standing just a few yards away, burning with pure fury. My fingernails dug with agonizing force into the raw flesh of my palms. Yet I was completely numb to the physical pain. Han Muyu's voice continued to filter through the heavy air, accompanied by a deeply layered, regretful sigh. But what if, and I genuinely mean just a hypothetical worst-case scenario, what if Pei Yunzhou actually discovers the whole truth one day? It would completely, utterly destroy him. After all, the poor guy is just so hopelessly, blindly infatuated with you. Following an agonizingly prolonged, suffocating stretch of silence, Qin Muyan finally broke her composure and spoke. She kept her gaze fixed firmly downward, staring directly at the fragile, bloodless countenance of Pei Xinghui cradled in her arms. Her vocal delivery retained its signature, unshakable, clinical calm. Yet in this precise moment, it carried a chilling undertone of heavy exhaustion and complete entitlement. Xinghui possesses a hypersensitive, completely fragile disposition. He has been absolutely incapable of handling severe psychological trauma since he was a child, and he simply lacks the fortitude to survive these life-threatening crises. She paused for a brief, calculated moment, before slowly hoisting her chin up, her hollow abyssal eyes staring blankly into the empty space ahead, as she uttered words with a terrifyingly detached, emotionless cadence. But Pei Yunzhou, he is entirely built different. Those 4 horrific, dismissive words, he is built different, slammed into my psyche like iron stakes, completely paralyzing me on the spot. A deafening, chaotic ringing violently detonated inside my skull, as every single traumatic nightmare from my past that I had meticulously suppressed and romanticized instantly breached the floodgates of my mind, drowning me in absolute agony. On the exact high-profile day she bought out the city's billboards to declare her love, I had happily stepped out of our house to purchase a special celebratory gift for her, only to be violently T-boned and launched into the air by an out-of-control vehicle. My body suffered catastrophic, extensive comminuted fractures across multiple limbs, leaving me stranded in a comatose state inside the intensive care unit for 3 agonizing months. The exact second I finally regained consciousness, she fiercely clutched my hand with tear-swollen eyes, whispering, "Yunzhou, you genuinely scared me to absolute death. Thank God you managed to survive." On the monumental grand opening and ribbon-cutting day of the luxury Yunzhou Manor, I was brutally ambushed and abducted right off the open street, before being thrown into a pitch-black subterranean dungeon. Consecutive days of high-voltage electrocution and brutal waterboarding completely broke my psyche, causing severe incontinence, and leaving me in a state of shattered delusional trauma, scarcely resembling a living human being. It was she who eventually led a tactical security squad to breach the compound, cradling my violently convulsing, hyperventilating frame as she repeated over and over, "Don't be afraid anymore. I've finally come to take you home." And back when I was taken hostage by a ruthless criminal syndicate, the heavily armed captors demanded that she drop to her knees and beg for mercy before they would release me. She flatly refused to kneel, causing the high-stakes hostage negotiations to devolve into a complete deadlock standstill, solely to prevent her from being placed in an awkward, compromised position, just to shield her from a deeply awkward and conflicting situation. I manually, desperately thrashed against the coarse ropes binding my wrists, ultimately leaping blindly into the violently churning lethal ocean currents, and narrowly avoiding a watery grave as my lungs filled with brine. By the absolute second they dragged my near lifeless corpse onto dry land, half my spirit had already crossed over. Yet there she was, faithfully keeping vigil by my sterile hospital bedside, shedding an endless, unstoppable torrent of bitter tears. How on earth could you be so hopelessly, incredibly foolish? If your heart had actually completely stopped beating, how am I supposed to go on living without you? Every single time a tragedy struck, she stayed meticulously pinned to my side, clamping her fingers around my broken hand like an unbreakable vice. Every single time her eyes would flush a deep, sorrowful crimson, using her most deceptively angelic, soothing cadence to beg for my forgiveness. She would whisper, Yunjo, you have to be resilient and survive this nightmare. I still desperately want to build a beautiful future together with you. And like an absolute naive fool, I blindly believed every single word. I genuinely, wholeheartedly thought that was the definition of absolute love. A bond forged through navigating the most violent tempest hand in hand. An unshakable promise to never abandon one another. But it turns out it was all a beautifully manufactured, sick illusion. The reality was simply that she knew from day one I possessed the stamina to absorb the trauma. I was merely a highly durable, perfectly optimized piece of ballistic armor. A disposable, heavy-duty human shield designed to tank every incoming threat. Every single ounce of that horrific devastation, agony, and psychological torture should have rightfully systematically destroyed Pei Xinghui, but solely because a sacrificial lamb like me existed to bleed in his place. He got to live a pristine, completely unblemished lifestyle. I was nothing more than a functional asset, a walk-in manifestation of a catastrophic lie, and a complete, unmitigated, absolute joke of a human being. Every single psychological scar from my past was violently, ruthlessly ripped wide open in this precise second, exposing the gruesome, blood-soaked truth festering beneath the surface. Most notably, the deep abdominal wound where I had caught that lethal blade to save her life, suddenly flared up under the sheer devastating impact of my skyrocketing emotional trauma, erupting into a vicious, twisting, phantom agony. The sheer force of the physical sensation forced a sharp gasp from my parched throat, causing my knees to buckle as I violently slid onto the cold pavement, thick beads of freezing sweat instantly erupting across my pale forehead. Yet this physical torment failed to match even a microscopic fraction of the agony shattering my soul. Moving completely on muscle memory, my trembling fingers dialed that overly familiar number once more. This time, after an agonizingly prolonged echoing dial tone. The line clicked open, "Hey hubby." Her smooth voice filtered through the speaker carrying its signature, flawlessly calculated sweetness. And she even let out a light, completely unbothered chuckle. I was literally just trapped in an intense executive board meeting, so I had my device turned completely on silent mode. "What's going on, yo? Did you miss me that much already?" I sat completely crumpled into a dark, pathetic ball in the shadows, shivering violently from a terrifying cocktail of pure pain and betrayal. My voice coming out incredibly raspy and broken as I whispered, so thoroughly hollow and unnatural, Muyan, my old wound. The surgical trauma from back then has completely flared up again. It hurts so incredibly bad, please. In this exact pathetic microsecond, I genuinely, desperately needed her presence. Even though I had just unearthed the absolute horrific truth of her deception. And even though my heart had already been utterly obliterated into microscopic dust. My body's most basic primal survival instinct still subconsciously begged to cling to her as a lifeline. An absolute dead silence hung on the other end of the line for 2 agonizing seconds until background noise bled through. "Where's the critically injured casualty? Hurry up, bring the spine board and stretcher over here right now." Right at that precise, devastating moment, the piercing, high-pitched wail of arriving ambulance sirens rapidly roared in from the distance. Kim Muyan hastily muffled the receiver with her hand, and abruptly, unceremoniously terminated the call. There was absolutely zero attempt to offer an explanation, and not a single solitary word of basic human concern. Through the distant shadows, I watched as she bent down with absolute hyper-delicate care to hoist a comatose Pei Xinghui from the concrete, and with the frantic assistance of the emergency first responders, carefully secured him inside the rear of the emergency vehicle. The raw, agonizing panic and frantic desperation etched across her face was completely, undeniably genuine, and it pierced my eyes like a blinding white-hot blade. Because absolutely none of that passionate devotion was meant for me. She stood frozen at the threshold of the ambulance doors, casting one final sweeping glance over the chaotic, debris-strewn crime scene, before stepping her long legs inside the cabin. The heavy metal doors slammed shut with a thunderous bang, and the vehicle instantly tore away, leaving nothing but a cloud of exhaust behind, leaving me entirely alone amidst the ruined landscape and the suffocating stench of fresh copper. I remained completely paralyzed, slumped flat against the pavement, staring blankly at the exact coordinate where the ambulance had vanished into the city traffic, as the absolute last microscopic ember of naive hope in my soul was permanently extinguished, leaving behind nothing but freezing dead ash and an all-consuming apocalyptic ocean of pure, unadulterated hatred. The physical agony was still violently ravaging my abdominal walls, Yet that newfound venomous wrath acted as a dark catalyst, injecting synthetic adrenaline into my veins. I aggressively forced my broken body to stand up from the asphalt, and with a trembling, ice-cold hand, I dialed a completely different phone number. Attorney Lee, I need you to immediately draft a comprehensive divorce petition for me. Regarding the division of our marital estate, I am solely retaining the assets that were legally registered under my name prior to our marriage. As for the rest of her billions, I refuse to touch a single solitary penny. Furthermore, source the most ruthless, highly competent private investigator on your payroll. Spare absolutely zero expense. I want every single birth archive from Bushing Hospital dated September 1st, 6 years ago, thoroughly unearned. The exact microsecond the line went completely dead, I collapsed my upper body against the freezing concrete structure behind me, drawing in massive, desperate gasps of air. Just a few yards away, Hanmuyu's devastating words were still looping relentlessly inside my skull like a demonic chant. I clamped my jaw together with such brutal force that my teeth threatened to shatter, violently forcing myself to swear an absolute oath of vengeance, to take every single one of those agonizing words, and every single one of those horrific scenes, carving them piece by piece into the deepest tissues of my soul. This excruciating torment, and this toxic venomous hatred are the absolute non-negotiable price I must pay for being so utterly blind, and letting my naive, foolish heart lead me straight into a slaughterhouse. I desperately dry swallowed the emergency painkillers I always kept on my person, forcing myself to rest in the pitch-black silence for a long, grueling moment, waiting until my physical system finally generated enough artificial strength to stand upright. I fired up the ignition and drove straight to my parents' house. I needed absolute tactical composure right now, and I needed to safely retrieve Chen and get him out of there first. No matter how grotesque or sickening the final reality of his lineage turns out to be, he is still fundamentally the innocent boy I nurtured and raised with my own two hands. However, the exact millisecond I stepped into the foyer, I caught my parents frantically rushing toward the front exit, looking exactly like they were preparing to sprint out the door on a hyper-urgent matter. "Yunjo, what on earth are you doing back here already?" My mother didn't even bother to break her panicked stride for a fraction of a second, aggressively throwing her heavy winter coat over her shoulders, while barking out words in a panicked frenzy. "Your father and I are literally racing out to the hospital this exact instant. We just received word that our precious Ashing suffered a horrific traumatic shock today, so we absolutely must get to his bedside immediately to comfort him. That poor boy has possessed such a fragile, delicate disposition since he was a toddler. Heaven forbid this chaotic incident triggers some kind of psychological breakdown." The absolute last remaining shred of domestic sanctuary I thought I possessed shattered into worthless dust. I stood there completely rooted to the cold floorboards like a ghost, watching their frantic, retreating silhouettes rush past me. As my vocal cords released a chillingly flat monotone cadence, "I have an absolute monumental announcement to make. Do not take another single step out of this house." Their frantic movements instantaneously locked up, freezing them right in their tracks, and they slowly turned their heads around to look at me with annoyed impatience. I am officially filing for a total, absolute divorce. The entire living room was instantly plunged into a suffocating dead silence for one heavy second. What absolute unmitigated garbage are you spewing right now? My father was the absolute first to snap out of the stupor, his eyes bulging out of his skull with pure rage, as his volume instantly skyrocketed into a deafening roar. "Have you completely lost your goddamn mind, you ungrateful brat? Kids, do you have any actual comprehension of Chinmuyan's astronomical social status? She is an absolute monarch, one of the most powerful, untouchable elite women in all of Jinhai's. Tens of thousands of successful men would gladly sell their souls just to crawl at her feet. Furthermore, look at the insanely lavish lifestyle she has showered you with all these consecutive years. If you demanded the stars from heaven, she would gladly hand you the entire galaxy on a silver platter. Are you seriously out of your mind from living too comfortably?" My mother instantly chimed in, aggressively backing up my father's verbal assault. "Exactly. Yunjo, when a married couple builds a life together under one roof, it is completely natural to experience minor friction and speed bumps along the way, even if you are selfish enough to have absolute zero regard for your own future. You absolutely must take Chenchen's entire future into account. The poor child is still so incredibly young and helpless. The exact second you go through with this chaotic divorce, how on earth do you expect him to survive the fallout? Chen." I slowly contorted my lips into a deeply twisted, mocking smirk, my entire soul completely overwhelmed by an icy, desolating wave of absolute despair. I forced out each distinct syllable one by one, as if brutally grinding them directly through my clenched teeth. "That boy is explicitly Pei Xinghui's biological bastard. By what twisted logic? By what right should I ever waste a single breath considering his future?" I had fully expected that the moment I violently tore down this fragile veil of deception, and ruthlessly exposed this utterly grotesque, preposterous reality, they would be left completely paralyzed with absolute shock. That they would boil over with righteous, explosive fury. that they would weep for the horrific sacrifices I had endured, and that they would stand shoulder to shoulder with me to scream at the sheer unmitigated injustice of this universe. But they didn't do a single solitary one of those things. Instead, they merely choked violently on their own breath, the guilty expressions across their faces instantly morphing into an absolutely spectacular circus of panic. Their shifty eyes desperately darted around the room, every last ounce of their parental authority instantly evaporating into thin air, resembling nothing more than low-life thieves caught red-handed at the scene of a crime. My father let out a weak, pathetic dry cough, his voice instantly dropping into a thoroughly hollow, trembling pitch. How exactly did you unearth that specific information? I violently snapped my head up to stare at them, as my already heavily mutilated, thoroughly lacerated heart felt like it was being targeted and brutally pierced by a barrage of 1,000 iron arrows. The sheer unmitigated agony causing my vision to completely darken in nauseating waves, leaving my entire interior looking like a pulverized, bloody mess. They already knew. They had known the absolute truth from day one that the child in Chin Muyan's womb was sired entirely by Patient Kui. They were perfectly aware that her entire sham of a marriage to me was a calculated, demonic conspiracy from its very inception. They understood the catastrophic level of life-threatening danger that came with locking down this woman, and they knew exactly how many hidden blades and sniper scopes would be permanently aimed at her husband. And yet, knowing all of this, they intentionally threw me out into the cold, brutally weaponizing me a son who carried the exact same biological bloodline coursing through their veins, without a single microsecond of hesitation or human remorse, pushing me straight into the slaughterhouse, to serve as a literal flesh and blood sandbag to absorb the bullets meant for their precious Patient Kui. I genuinely could not comprehend it. There was a mere negligible 1-year age gap separating myself and Patient Kui. We were both supposed to be their biological flesh and blood, yet from the exact moment of our childhood up until this very day, every single mouth-watering meal, every luxury toy, and every piece of brand new clothing was always explicitly reserved for Patient Kui's first pick. The literal millisecond I even dared to advocate for myself or claim my fair share, I was instantly met with a barrage of toxic ear-splitting verbal abuse, and more often than not, a brutal physical beating. The absolute solitary anomaly to this lifelong pattern was my orchestrated marriage to Chin Muyan. During that era, they completely reversed their usual toxic behavior, aggressively forcing us together and pulling out all the stops to lock down the union, exhausting every single manipulative psychological tactic within their arsenal to seal my fate, acting as if they were absolutely terrified I might lose out on this cosmic once-in-a-lifetime romantic opportunity. I genuinely, foolishly believed back then that they had finally opened their eyes and were looking out for my best interests for the first time in my miserable life. It turns out I was nothing more than a hopelessly naive, pathetic clown. I was the ultimate textbook definition of a sucker, systematically manipulated and played like a cheap violin by everyone, including my own biological parents. Does my heart still burn with agonizing sorrow? No, at this point my entire internal system has gone completely thoroughly numb. A sudden dark chuckle unexpectedly escaped my lips, as my icy gaze slowly, deliberately swept across their panicked faces. That twisted smirk was infinitely more gruesome and gut-wrenching than a river of tears. So, it turns out every single one of you was an active accomplice all along. Okay, fine, so what the hell do you actually intend to do about it now? My father completely backed into a corner and bursting with toxic defensive rage snapped. He aggressively thrust his neck forward, overflowing with the dangerous explosive humiliation of a liar who had been utterly exposed. The high-profile marriage is already legally dead and locked down. The kid has already been born and raised for 6 whole years. What more do you want from us? I summoned every ounce of raw psychological willpower to suppress the violent storm raging in my chest, pulling the official divorce petition from my jacket and slamming it firmly onto the glass coffee table. I don't give a damn what kind of manipulative, underhanded tactics you have to deploy. Just make sure Chin Muyan signs her name on the dotted line. How dare you stand under my roof and threaten your own parents? My father flew into a violent, unmitigated rage, hoisting his heavy palm and brutally slapping me across the face with all his might. The impact echoed through the room with a sharp, deafening crack. The sheer kinetic force violently snapped my head over to the side, a brilliant crimson welt instantaneously ballooning across my cheek, as a warm trickle of fresh metallic blood began to ooze from the corner of my split lip. It throbbed with a burning, white-hot physical agony. I had endured this exact type of savage physical assault more times than I could count since childhood. Every single incident was explicitly orchestrated to protect Patient Kui, whether because I accidentally broke one of his toys, unintentionally stole his precious spotlight, or right this exact second posed a direct catastrophic threat to his fragile interests. This precise moment was absolutely no exception to the lifelong rule. I slowly, calculatedly rotated my neck back around to face them, lifting my hand to casually smear away the crimson streak staining my jawline, my eyes flashing with a terrifyingly flat, dead serenity. You are completely correct. I am explicitly, aggressively threatening you. After all, as I stand here today, I have absolutely zero left to lose in this world. But the moment Chinmuyan's relentless, bloodthirsty syndicate enemies discover the identity of her actual true vulnerability, what kind of horrific, gruesome fate do you think will befall Pei Xinghui and his precious little bastard? My mother's complexion instantaneously turned a ghost-white, bloodless shade of gray, her lips trembling uncontrollably in pure terror, as she found herself completely incapable of articulating a single coherent syllable. My father instinctively raised his arm to strike me a second time, but his hand froze entirely mid-air, paralyzed by the sheer gravity of my words, his entire frame shaking violently with absolute unbridled fury. You absolute, ungrateful, rebellious monster, fine, great, magnificent. We will force her hand and secure the signature for you. My mother desperately beat my father to the punch, cutting him off, as she practically shrieked at the top of her lungs. We will absolutely handle this matter and make sure it gets sorted out perfectly. Just please, we beg you, do not do anything rash or impulsive. We will keep this entire arrangement completely hidden from Yanyan for now, and we will definitively find a way to manipulate her into signing those papers. I stared at her face, completely dominated by a raw, unmasked panic exclusively for the sake of Pei Xinghui's well-being. And the absolute final remaining sliver of my heart was violently pulverized into microscopic dust. The literal second I initially announced my intention to file for divorce, they fiercely opposed it with all their might, even going as far as to brutally physically assault me. Yet the mere microsecond I hinted that Pei Xinghui might face any incoming threat or danger, they capitulated instantly without a single solitary second of hesitation. How thoroughly sickeningly ironic. How profoundly, absolutely pathetic. My lips contorted into a deeply twisted, hollow grimace, forcing out a fractured smirk that looked infinitely more agonizing than a river of tears. The very moment this specific transaction is fully finalized and executed, any biological ties between us are officially permanently cut. From that second onward, we are absolute strangers. Leaving those words hanging in the heavy air, I didn't waste another second tracking the tangled mess of emotions on their faces, spinning around to permanently abandon that household which had never truly belonged to me for a single day. I hadn't even driven very far beyond the boundaries of the residential district before my smartphone violently vibrated in my pocket. It was an urgent cryptographic transmission from the private investigator I had just retained, requesting an immediate briefing at a highly classified, low-profile cafe across town. Seated deep within a secluded corner booth, the seasoned detective Old Wu slid a massive stack of high-resolution surveillance photos and a burner phone directly toward my chest. Mr. Pei, Yaosimati. This is the initial wave of intelligence we managed to successfully extract from the medical databases. I strongly advise you to mentally bracing yourself before looking through this material. I slowly flipped open the file, scanning the high-resolution prints, and every single individual image acted as a brutal, unrelenting manifestation of the most sadistic reality imaginable, solely to guarantee that she could enjoy an unblemished, hyper-luxurious lifestyle during her pregnancy. I had enslaved myself to my corporate office, pulling endless consecutive all-nighters, working myself completely to the bone until I resembled a walking corpse. Meanwhile, she was routinely visiting an ultra-exclusive private boutique maternity clinic alongside Pei Xinghui, sporting a blissfully radiant smile during her prenatal scans. Back when I was brutally targeted for a vicious retaliatory strike by her underworld adversaries, lying completely paralyzed on an emergency operating table with my life hanging by a razor-thin thread. She was actually ensconced in a premium delivery suite, tightly clutching Pei Xinghui's hand while passionately moaning out his name as her true husband, while my abdominal surgical incisions were still actively oozing fresh metallic blood. I would bite through the excruciating physical torment, dragging my broken body out of bed in the dead of night to meticulously sterilize bottles mix formula and change Chenchen's diapers. Yet during those exact weeks, she had flown across the Pacific with Pei Xinghui to the shores of Hawaii, basking in absolute carefree luxury under the tropical sun. The captured images showcased her flashing the most dazzling, unbothered smile imaginable. Old Wu locked his gaze onto my trembling frame, clearly hesitating to speak, a heavy undertone of deep professional pity bleeding into his vocal delivery. Mr. Pei, there is still one more critical, highly disturbing piece of information you need to hear. According to the deep intelligence I managed to successfully extract from the encrypted networks, while all sources, that brutal, life-threatening, retaliatory ambush you fell victim to exactly 6 long years ago. The precise catastrophic incident where you heroically threw yourself in front of a blade to shield Madame Qin. There is an incredibly high probability that the entire scenario was meticulously orchestrated and staged by Madame Qin herself. I violently snapped my head up toward him, staring directly into his eyes with absolute shivering disbelief, because at that exact time she was rapidly approaching her final delivery window. And regarding the medical fact that she was carrying a set of fraternal twins, she was completely thoroughly aware of it from the very beginning, only by ensuring you were critically, catastrophically injured, and rendering you completely physically incapable of entering the delivery room alongside her. Could she seamlessly, invisibly smuggle your biological daughter completely out of the facility without a trace, before confidently gaslighting you into believing that she had only given birth to a single male child? My brain instantaneously short-circuited into a state of absolute dead white noise. I violently clamped my trembling hand over my mouth, as a wave of violent stomach-churning nausea swept through my entire digestive system, accompanied by a localized white-hot physical agony so profound that it felt as though I was about to aggressively regurgitate every drop of bitter bile left in my body. It all came flooding back to me in a single terrifying flash of clarity. I vividly remembered that exact evening we had just finished sharing an intensely intimate, tender moment together, when her smartphone suddenly lit up with a cryptic call, prompting her to frantically sprint out of our house in a massive rush. She explicitly claimed there was a catastrophic high-stakes emergency requiring her immediate presence at the corporate headquarters, only finally slinking back through the front door the following morning, her entire face thoroughly drained and masks of exhaustion etching her features. Yet she still wrapped her arms tightly around my frame, whispering that everything had been perfectly handled. Exactly 1 short month following that suspicious night, she stood before me and happily announced that she had successfully conceived a child, specifically emphasizing that we were being blessed with twins. I was completely, utterly ecstatic with pure joy in that exact microsecond, sincerely believing that the heavens were showering me with unmerited grace. But the reality was she had already run the genetic scans and discovered she was carrying fraternal twins, and had already ruthlessly made the cold, calculated decision to permanently discard the baby that actually belonged to my bloodline, solely to guarantee that Patient Kui's illegitimate bastard could seamlessly inherit the entire multi-billion-dollar Qin empire without suspicion. She didn't hesitate for a single second to orchestrate a literal assassination plot against her own husband, heartlessly abandoning her own biological daughter to the cold streets, and nearly ending my life in a pool of my own blood. Qin Le Mu Yan. A heavily suppressed, animalistic roar of pure agony finally ripped its way out of my parched throat, as an unstoppable burning torrent of tears violently breached the floodgates of my eyes. At this absolute rock bottom, I could no longer muster the energy to maintain a single shred of dignity, pathetically collapsing my upper body flat against the wooden table, my shoulders shaking with violent, uncontrollable convulsions. My entire heart felt as though it had been brutally, physically shredded into raw meat by human hands, leaving it dripping with fresh crimson exposed under the blinding glare of the afternoon sun. Is this the absolute undying devotion you routinely bragged about to the entire city? How can a single human being possess such a thoroughly demonic, cold-blooded soul? Old Wu let out a long, deeply regretful sigh, silently sliding a handful of clean tissues across the table toward my trembling fingers. He waited patiently until my explosive breakdown had subsided into a hollow, trembling silence, before gently clear his throat and breaking the quiet once more. Mr. Pei, regarding the current status and whereabouts of your biological daughter, I violently snapped my neck upward, a final desperate ember of frantic hope instantly igniting within my heavily bloodshot eyes. Old Wu's expression instantly twisted into a grim, deeply uncomfortable grimace, his vocal tone dropping into a heavy, somber pitch. According to the operational metadata, we have managed to successfully recover. The newborn infant was ruthlessly abandoned the exact microsecond she left the womb. There were initially internal medical intake archives logged within the hospital mainframe, but those digital breadcrumbs were systematically manually scrubbed by an expert shortly after. Furthermore, the black market fixer who was personally hired to handle the physical disposal tragically perished in a suspicious freak accident. Consequently, it is currently impossible to trace her definitive trail or determine if she is even alive. My entire vision instantly went pitch black, my muscles losing all structural integrity as I nearly slid entirely off the leather booth onto the floor. My own precious daughter, the biological flesh and blood I had spent 10 agonizingly long months praying for day and night. That innocent child whose face I had never even been permitted to look upon, had actually been heartlessly thrown away like a piece of worthless domestic garbage. She had literally just drawn her very first breath of air, so unimaginably fragile, so tiny and soft, completely incapable of even focusing her eyes to look at the world around her, before being classified as an inconvenient obstacle and a toxic liability discarded by her own birth mother. Keep digging. I lunged across the small table, clamping my fingers around Old Wu's wrist like an unbreakable iron vice, my voice coming out as a raspy, unhinged, and thoroughly psychotic screech. A manic dark obsession swirling deeply within my pupils. You keep this investigation running indefinitely. I will personally fund your firm with an absolute fortune, $100 million. Scour the heavens and tear through the deepest depths of the underworld. Even if you have to violently flip this entire nation upside down stone by stone, you absolutely must unearth the final resting place or location of my daughter. I had absolutely zero cognitive memory of how I eventually exited that establishment. Nor could I recall the mindless automated drive back to that grand estate I once called home. The moment I numbly pushed open the heavy mahogany front entrance, The entire interior was bathed in a brilliant radiant cascade of warm architectural lighting, exuding an absolute masterpiece of cozy domestic bliss. A faint rhythmical bubbling sound drifted softly from the gourmet kitchen. The distinct aroma confirming it was the expensive medicinal broth she routinely brewed to nurse my failing health. Kim Muyan was standing elegantly before the marble kitchen island wearing a designer cooking apron, her slender model-esque silhouette casting a flawless profile, looking completely captivating and angelic under the soft golden ambiance of the recessed ceiling lights, radiating the absolute perfection of a dedicated loving wife. Detecting the subtle click of the front door, she gracefully rotated her body around while carefully balancing the steaming tureen, gliding out into the open concept dining hall toward me, her breathtaking hypersymmetrical phoenix eyes crinkling into two beautiful crescent shapes of pure affection, her entire gaze absolutely overflowing with simulated adoration. Welcome home, sweetheart. Y'all. Hurry up and wash your hands. This nourishing medicinal soup has literally just finished simmering. Make sure to drink it while it's piping hot to restore your health. I remained completely rooted to the spot, entirely motionless, merely staring at her in absolute chilling silence, gazing intently at this exact face that had thoroughly captivated my soul for 7 long years, only to find it looking more unrecognizably alien than ever before. After an agonizingly long, suffocating silence, I finally allowed my vocal cords to vibrate, my tone so disturbingly flat and detached, it sounded like I was casually asking about today's weather forecast. Where exactly did you go during the lunch hour today? The radiant, pristine smile plastered across her face instantly froze for a microsecond, but it was a mere fleeting glitch so insanely fast that it was practically imperceptible to the naked human eye. Immediately after that slip-up was seamlessly remasked by a wave of tender affection and playful scolding, I was stuck at the corporate headquarters silly. I was buried under an absolute mountain of emergency high-stakes contracts. Didn't I already text you about it? She gracefully set the steaming tureen down onto the glass coffee table, gliding effortlessly across the floor until she stood directly in front of my paralyzed frame, stretching out her slender arms to wrap them tightly around my waist, viciously drawing my rigid body into her warm, deceptive embrace. She tilted her beautiful face upward to look into my eyes, her perfectly sculpted features radiating a hyper-calculated, coquettish charm, her vocal register shifting into an ultra-soft, melting cadence. All right, I get it. Your wifey was totally in the wrong this time. I failed to rush back in time to keep you company, and completely caused you unnecessary anxiety, okay? She lightly extended onto her tiptoes, gently planting a feather-light butterfly kiss directly onto my lips, before leaning flush against my chest, whispering in a low, deeply soothing purr, "Come on now. Give me a little sweet kiss, and let's leave all that silly anger behind, okay?" That intoxicatingly familiar, expensive designer perfume aggressively invaded my nasal passages, paired with the exact same physical touch I used to worship, and that flawlessly engineered, nurturing tone of voice, confronting a liar while already possessing the absolute definitive proof of their deception. This was the absolute ultimate lifeline I was extending to her, as well as the very final mercy I was granting to my own fractured sanity. Yet she still chose to feed me another layer of elaborate, pathologically calculated fabrications, using the most tender, devastatingly affectionate mannerisms to deliberately deflect, dodging the core question while smoothly talking in circles. I didn't violently shove her body away from mine, nor did I offer even a fraction of a response to that sickeningly hollow kiss. I merely used a pair of dead hollow eyes that had already thoroughly seen through the matrix of her lies, watching her masterclass performance unfold in absolute frozen silence. She seemed to subtly pick up on the disturbing unnatural aura shifting through the room, slowly untangling herself from my waist just a bit, before reaching deep into her designer pocket to extract a premium plush velvet jewelry box, unveiling its contents with the proud dramatic flair of someone presenting a rare treasure. "Tada, open your eyes. Look at what your beautiful wife specially procured for you." Resting silently inside the plush box was a high-end luxury watch, a custom iced-out Rolex dripping in flawless factory diamonds, radiating absolute unmitigated extravagance, fracturing the ambient light into a blinding glare that practically scorched my retinas. I specifically ordered my personal assistant to bid on this one-of-a-kind masterpiece at a private Sotheby's auction just for you. She lifted the timepiece, gently measuring it against my wrist, her smirk exuding a lazy, immensely self-satisfied confidence. The high-profile charity gala is scheduled to take place exactly 3 days from now, and you will be wearing this exact piece when you walk in alongside me. By the end of that night, the entire upper echelon of society will know that you, Pei Yunzhou, will forever remain Kim Woo-yeon's absolute heavily guarded treasure. That blinding diamond glare felt like 1,000 jagged blades brutally hacking into my already mutilated heart. How could I have possibly been so staggeringly, catastrophically idiotic in the past? So hopelessly blind that I mistook these high-profile performative displays of affection for undying pure devotion, genuinely believing I was the only man who could ever capture her heart. In reality, it was nothing more than a calculated strategy to repeatedly drag me into the blinding spotlight, shoving me directly into the crosshairs of incoming danger, and positioning me right at ground zero where all the sniper scopes and hidden daggers were aimed. She systematically engineered this public narrative to ensure everyone believed I was her absolute world, guaranteeing that all the deep-seated blood feuds, underworld rivalries, and toxic jealousies triggered by her empire would be laser-focused with lethal precision onto my head. She didn't harbor a single shred of love for me. She was merely weaponizing the illusion of love to build a golden cage around my eventual corpse. Right at that exact high-tension microsecond, the heavy mahogany entrance doors of the mansion were violently thrown open from the outside, and a sudden burst of hyper-energetic childish giggles and boisterous laughter instantly shattered the suffocating frozen silence of the villa. Daddy star, daddy star. Iso, are you truly cross your heart staying over to tuck me into bed tonight? We already pinky swore on it, so you are legally forbidden from backing out. Chenchin bolted into the main foyer like a high-velocity human missile, his tiny fingers tightly aggressively clutching Pei Xinghui's hand, his little face completely flushed with pure unadulterated ecstasy. Pei Xinghui was dragged forward a bit, losing his footing slightly under the boy's enthusiastic tugs, snapping his gaze upward to look at me as a fleeting flash of deep guilt and panic crossed his features, before instantly masking it with his trademark gentle soft-spoken smirk. Oh hey, big brother, I see you're already back home. He then looked down at the ecstatic Chenchin clinging to his side, offering a sigh filled with a calculated mixture of helplessness and intense affection. Man Chenchin has been completely attached to my hip all afternoon, relentlessly begging and throwing a tantrum for me to stay overnight to keep him company. So, I guess it's really up to you. As those words left his mouth, his eyes subtly calculative drifted over to gauge Qin Muyan's reaction. Qin Muyan instantly picked up on the hidden cue, yet she merely maintained a pristine soft smile as she gracefully bent her knees, gently caressing Chenchin's hair with a display of pure maternal warmth. Chenchin stopped throwing a tantrum and be a good boy. When it comes to domestic matters within this household, we always defer entirely to your father's executive decision. As she delivered that line, she slowly tilted her face up, locking her eyes directly onto mine. Instantly, every single pair of eyes in the room locked completely onto me, as if the mere act of me shaking my head in disapproval, or refusing to grant permission, would immediately brand me as the toxic villain destroying their domestic bliss. This exact manipulative scenario had played out countless times over the past few years. Ever since our wedding, Qin Muyan would always use the excuse that Pei Xinghui is your biological brother, and spending more time together will naturally strengthen your bond, or that Chenchin absolutely adores his little uncle, so we should let Xinghui spend as much time with him as possible. She would frequently and highly intentionally invite Pei Xinghui to lounge around our estate, making overnight stays a regular occurrence. Initially, I naively thought my wife was just being incredibly considerate and deeply thoughtful, genuinely trying to help me foster a healthy, loving relationship with my estranged family. Looking back at it now, I was nothing more than a pathetic, cuckolded clown, a massive eyesore of an obstacle taking up space in this room, and actively disrupting their real picture-perfect family from enjoying their wholesome lifestyle together. I was merely a brainless surrogate tool used to raise another man's child. And the most pathetic part was that I had done it all with a massive, grateful smile on my face. After an agonizingly long silence, my vocal cords finally vibrated, my voice cutting through the air like an absolute shard of ice, completely stripped of even a single microsecond of human warmth. Tonight is completely inconvenient. He needs to leave. The heavy atmosphere in the luxury living room instantaneously froze into solid ice. The manufactured gentle smile on Pei Xinghui's face immediately disintegrated, a dark venomous shadow flashing deep within his eyes. Bad daddy. You are a horrible bad daddy. Chenchin violently released his grip on Pei Xinghui's hand, his little face flushing a furious boiling shade of crimson. As he charged directly at me, relentlessly raining down his tiny fists against my leg, he repeatedly struck me while screaming at the top of his lungs. Why are you being so mean and kicking Uncle Star out? Go away. I absolutely hate you. You're a horrible bad daddy. I am never ever going to love you again. Those tiny fists repeatedly pelting against my lower body didn't actually cause any real physical pain. After all, how much raw physical force could a 6-year-old toddler possibly generate? Yet every single strike felt like a blunt, rusty blade hacking into my flesh, systematically slicing my heart into microscopic pieces with slow, agonizing precision. I had raised this child for 6 long years, 6 whole uninterrupted years. I had willingly poured every single ounce of my soul, my physical energy and my unconditional love entirely into this boy's life. I was right there beside him for his very first newborn cry, his very first innocent smile, the exact first time his lips formed the word daddy, his very first unassisted steps across the floor, and the terrifying first time he fell critically ill. I was right there by his side through every single milestone and fleeting moment, yet now solely to defend another man. He didn't hesitate to violently assault me with his own hands and hurl such venomous, hateful words at my face. I remained completely rooted to the spot, not even bothering to dodge his incoming strikes. merely lowering my gaze to look down at this child whom I had once fiercely protected as my most precious treasure. His furious, hostile expression could no longer be reconciled with the soft, adorable little angel etched deep in my memories. And the absolute final ember of light within my eyes was permanently extinguished. Chen, how could you possibly raise your hands against your father like that? Kim Muyeon hastily took a step forward, knitting her brows in mock disapproval as she firmly pulled Chen away, seemingly reprimanding him on the surface, yet phrasing her words with masterfully manipulative hidden undertones. Your father didn't actually say that Uncle Pei Xinghui is absolutely forced to leave this house tonight. So what are you throwing such a frantic tantrum for? She then directed her gaze toward me, her eyes radiating a calculated mixture of helplessness and desperate pleading, as if silently signaling to me, look at how incredibly hysterical the child is right now. So please stop being so stubborn and just let it go. They were acting out their little family drama yet again, ruthlessly backing me into a corner to extort another spineless concession. A sudden wave of absolute exhaustion crashed over me. A profound, deep-seated spiritual fatigue and overwhelming nausea stemming from the very depths of my soul. Do whatever the hell you want. I coldly spat out those 6 final words, spinning on my heel to retreat into the master bedroom. The heavy door slammed shut behind my back. Yet it was completely incapable of blocking out the explosive wave of triumphant cheers and boisterous laughter that instantly erupted outside. Yay! Daddy Star gets to stay over after all. Chen, you are absolutely amazing. I always knew you were the strongest boy ever. Honestly, Xinghui, you are completely spoiling him rotten. So I didn't even bother to flick on the light switch, collapsing my broken, exhausted body directly onto the massive plush mattress. I was just so incredibly spent. This absolute bone-deep psychological fatigue forced my heavy eyelids to slowly slide shut into the darkness. I have absolutely zero concept of how much time had drifted past before I suddenly snapped awake in the pitch-black room, my hand instinctively reaching out to feel the mattress beside me. The fabric was completely ice-cold. The other side of the bed was entirely vacant, lacking even the faintest trace of lingering human warmth. My heart instantaneously sank straight into a dark bottomless abyss. Kim Muyeon was completely gone. In the dead of night at this ungodly hour. Where could she possibly have slipped off to? A bone-chilling, suffocating realization silently coiled itself around my frantic heart like a venomous viper. I slowly swung my legs over the edge and sat up, stepping onto the cold floor barefoot, gliding down the corridor like a hollow specter. The entire estate was dead quiet, but the absolute microsecond I approached the threshold of the guest bedroom, filtered through the narrow gap of the slightly ajar door, I distinctly captured the unmistakable sound of heavily suppressed, ragged gasps escaping from within. It was a specific, intimate frequency that I recognized all too well, peering directly through that razor-thin slice of open space. I witnessed a sickening tableau that instantaneously turned the blood in my veins to solid ice. Underneath the dim amber glow of the bedside lamp, Kim Muyeon was completely draped over Pei Xinghui, pinning him beneath her body. Her head buried low as a torrent of passionate, frantic kisses rained down aggressively upon his neck, his face and his lips accompanied by her fragile whimpers and uncontainable, breathless murmurs. It's been so many agonizing days since we last touched. I've been practically losing my mind craving you. Pei Xinghui, however, aggressively pressed his fingertips against her parted lips, his pupils swirling with an ugly mixture of toxic jealousy and paranoid insecurity. While I wasn't around, did you actually let that pathetic loser lay a single finger on you? Kim Muyeon's frantic movements froze entirely for a split second, before her crimson lips contorted into a deeply mocking, wicked smirk, overflowing with absolute disdain and pure, unadulterated disgust. Every single time I look at that hideous mutilated scar cutting across his body, do you honestly think I could ever muster the stomach to let him touch me? That specific jagged scar was the permanent souvenir from the night I heroically took a blade to save her life, grotesquely mapping its way across my entire abdomen, a violent reminder that had remained for 6 or 7 long years, never fading for even a single day. I had spent years naively worshipping it as the ultimate badge of honor for our sacred marriage, only to find out that in her eyes it was merely a repulsive stomach-churning blemish that completely killed any shred of her desire. Hearing her venomous words, a look of immense smug satisfaction washed over Pei Xinghui's face, his fingertips tracing a slow path across the pale, flawless skin of her exposed chest. I always knew you belonged exclusively to me, having secured the exact confirmation he desired. Pei Xinghui completely abandoned all remaining restraint, viciously flipping the dynamic to aggressively claim the dominant position. The premium silk bedsheets were violently twisted and tangled beneath the sheer force of their heavy movements, emitting a continuous rhythmic friction. Kim Muyeon threw her head back in absolute ecstasy, her throat continuously spilling out, crest of uninhibited euphoric groans, each vocalization striking rhythmically, like jagged rusty needles embedding themselves deep into my already mutilated bleeding heart. Those high-pitched echoing sounds, those explicit sickening images, those treacherous venomous dialogues. I slowly slumped my weight against the ice-cold corridor wall, unleashing a silent, completely unhinged laugh into the darkness. My shoulders convulsed with violent, uncontrollable tremors, my twisted expression looking 1,000 times more grotesque than any weeping face, as burning tears silently cascaded down my hollow cheeks. Just how incredibly worthless, how utterly expendable was I to them? I subconsciously lifted my trembling hand, gently tracing the jagged, monstrous scar cutting across my abdomen. Did it still hurt?
No, not at all. You're a medical but sensitivity.
Because the place suffering a far more catastrophic agony was right here. I tightly clutched my left chest, feeling as though a massive gaping crater had been violently blasted right through my heart, allowing the howling winds of reality to aggressively rip through it, flooding my internal organs with absolute razor-sharp shards of ice. The shifting sounds and movements echoing from behind that door grew increasingly louder, becoming utterly shameless and uninhibited, until a final animalistic grunt of release erupted from the man's throat, permanently shattering my soul into millions of microscopic pieces on the floor, leaving it completely beyond the realm of ever being reconstructed. I desperately struggled to haul my numbed body back onto my feet, wanting nothing more than to flee this stomach-churning toxic crime scene. But right at that exact microsecond, the faint, rapid patter of light footsteps echoed down the hallway. It was Chen, clad in his little cartoon pajamas, rubbing his half-asleep, groggy eyes. He marched with absolute, unwavering focus straight toward the guest bedroom entrance. His tiny hand aggressively slammed down on the handle, and with a loud thud, he swung the door wide open, before nimbly slipping inside like a frantic little monkey. Mommy Daddy Star, as the gap widened significantly. The full unedited reality of the interior layout was laid completely bare before my eyes. Kim Muyan loosely draped in a premium silk nightgown, her face still heavily flushed with the lingering crimson glow of ecstasy, instantly scooped Chen up into a tight embrace. Chen, you are absolutely the best boy ever. You truly are Mommy and Daddy's perfect precious little angel. She planted a heavy exaggerated kiss straight onto his cheek, receiving such high praise and validation. Chen's little face completely filled with smug, arrogant satisfaction, triumphantly waving his tiny fists in the air, as he weaponized his innocent, high-pitched toddler voice to spew the most venomous malice imaginable. If that useless bad nanny ever tries to talk back or misbehave again, I'll personally beat him up with my fists, and kick his pathetic butt completely out of our mansion. That innocent, childish voice felt like a heavy iron drill permanently puncturing a hollow void through my chest, allowing the freezing air to violently whistle through the emptiness. Yet my body could no longer register even a single shred of the physical pain. When I initially held the shocking DNA paternity test results in my trembling hands, a desperate, pathetic thought had actually crossed my mind. So what if Chen didn't share a single drop of my biological blood? I had lovingly raised him for 6 solid years, pouring every single ounce of my soul and life savings into his well-being, meaning he had already become my true son in every way that mattered. I had completely embraced him as my own flesh and blood. But looking back at that mindset now, it is so stultifyingly ridiculous, and so profoundly tragic. It turns out years of nurturing and paternal guidance can never truly triumph over vile, hardwired biological genetics. He is the absolute spitting image of his true biological parents, sharing the exact same cold-blooded, ruthless apathy, the same disgustingly narcissistic self-interest, and the same tendency to treat me like a worthless piece of trash they can exploit and stomp out whenever it suits their convenience. An ungrateful, backstabbing viper will always remain a viper. Every shred of my love was completely squandered on a monster. I silently turned my back on the hallway, gliding back into the master bedroom, bearing my broken frame deep into the suffocating, endless, pitch-black void. I have no clue how many hours slowly ticked away, before the bedroom door was quietly, stealthily creaked open, and a familiar wave of designer perfume drifted into the air. Kim Muyan had finally crawled back into our room, mirroring the routine of countless deceptive nights from our past. She smoothly, naturally slipped under the covers beside me, extending her slender arms, to habitually wrap me in a spooning embrace from behind. She gently rested her sculpted chin right against the crown of my head, letting out a soft, immensely satisfied sigh. That was once the exact intimate position I craved above all else in this world, feeling as though being locked tightly within her embrace granted me an impenetrable shield of absolute security against the cosmos, making me feel completely invincible to any hardship life could throw our way. But now the absolute second her body heat radiated through the thin fabric of our pajamas, a violent, overpowering wave of pure, unadulterated nausea surged violently from my stomach straight up into my throat, making me gag as I fought the urge to physically vomit. I tightly squeezed my eyes shut, abruptly rolling over to the far edge of the mattress, discreetly yet firmly breaking away from her toxic embrace. Her slender arms froze completely mid-air, suspended in the darkness, enshrouded in the pitch-black shadows. She seemed completely stunned and taken aback for a brief moment, before letting out an almost imperceptible, weary sigh. The cold night hours silently flowed by, 2 fractured souls occupying the exact same bed, yet separated by a massive, invisible wall that neither could ever cross again. A few days later, Chenchen's elite international kindergarten hosted its annual family field day. The lineup of events was incredibly packed, with the absolute highlight being the high-stakes parent-child swimming relay race. However, ever since that catastrophic day, I threw myself off a cliff into the ocean, just to save her from a difficult dilemma, nearly drowning to death in the process. I had developed severe, deeply ingrained psychological trauma toward open water. Forget about actually diving in to swim. Merely walking near a swimming pool triggered violent heart palpitations and involuntary tremors, and in severe episodes I would suffer suffocating breathing difficulties, while my vision went completely dark. It was physically impossible for me to enter the water, but Chen kept relentlessly whining and pestering me, screaming that he absolutely needed that gold medal, proclaiming he wanted it more than anything, seizing the opportunity Pei Xinghui, enthusiastically volunteered, boldly claiming he would take my place in the race. He even beat his chest confidently, promising Chen, "With your Uncle Star stepping up to the plate, I'm worth 2 of your regular dad. I'll easily secure that championship trophy just for you." I remained completely silent, offering no objection. On the day of the big event, the kindergarten's state-of-the-art aquatic center was buzzing with intense energy. The parents in attendance were exclusively ultra-wealthy elites and high society aristocrats, all prominent, heavy-hitting power players within Jinhai City. Qin Muyan, being the single largest financial donor and investor of the kindergarten, was naturally the absolute center of attention the moment she stepped inside, instantly swarmed by a sycophantic crowd treating her like royalty. Right as the official countdown to the race was about to begin, Pei Xinghui abruptly clutched his stomach, shuffling over to me with a contorted face full of intense agony and fake remorse. "Oh man, big brother, I'm so incredibly sorry, Atto. I think I must have eaten something completely rotten earlier. The pain is absolutely excruciating." He hunched over completely, even managing to squeeze out a few theatrical drops of sweat on his forehead. Maybe it's better if you would just take my place in the pool." The surrounding parents instantly locked their gazes onto us, their eyes flickering with judging curiosity. I slowly lifted my chin, staring daggers straight into his soul with a chillingly cold gaze. "Are you seriously playing this pathetic game on purpose? How convenient that your stomach didn't act up earlier or later, but miraculously decides to implode at this exact microsecond. Why don't I call an emergency medical team right now to diagnose whether this performance is real or fake?" The surrounding chatter instantaneously died down into a dead silence. Dozens of sharp analytical eyes swiveling in unison to scrutinize Pei Xinghui. The agony plastered across his face stiffened up completely, a fleeting flash of intense humiliation washing over his features, before he rapidly pivoted into an even more victimized, aggrieved persona, his voice trembling with the deep heartbreak of being maliciously misunderstood. "Big brother, Inyag. What on earth are you trying to imply by that?" My stomach genuinely suddenly started turning into knots. "Yo, do you absolutely have to humiliate me in front of everyone like this? Where am I supposed to hide my face from this disgrace? If you're so terrified of losing face, then you better jump into that pool right now." My tone remained unsettlingly calm, absolutely refusing to yield a single inch. "Daddy, oh, why do you have to be so incredibly wicked?" Chen was stomping his tiny feet in absolute panic, charging straight over to my side, violently shoving and pushing my frame with all his might, his little face utterly warped with unbridled fury. "The official countdown to the race is starting right now. If you don't go change into your swimsuit this instant, I'm going to be permanently disqualified from the event. If I don't get that championship medal, it's entirely your fault." Qin Muyan also knit her brows as she gracefully strode over, staring directly into my eyes, her tone carrying an absolute non-negotiable command. "Yunzhou, stop acting like a total buzzkill and ruining the child's excitement. Chen has been desperately praying to win this award for days and days on end. Just be a good, obedient husband and hurry to the locker room. Be obedient." It was always that same demand to be a mindless puppet. Every single person in this family knew exactly what catastrophic consequences awaited me if I entered the water. The violent heart palpitations, the uncontrollable tremors, the complete loss of consciousness, and the genuine life-threatening danger to my physical survival. Yet right now, they had formed a unified front to aggressively pressure me, not a single one of them bothering to ask the simple question, "Are you physically capable of doing this?" Not a single soul in this arena cared whether I lived or died. They were merely extorting me, forcing me to gamble my actual life, all for a worthless piece of plastic. Right at that exact high-tension microsecond, the kindergarten principal walked over with a polite, radiant smile, inquiring cordially, "Excuse me, Mr. Pei and CEO Qin, have you two finally decided which parent will officially be representing your family in the relay?" The starting whistle is about to blow in just a few moments. I parted my lips, about to vocally state my refusal, intending to utter the name Pei Xinghui, before the syllables could even escape past my teeth. Chen, standing right beside me, suddenly thrust his hands forward, utilizing every ounce of his toddler strength to violently slam into my waist. "Just hurry up and go in already." Caught completely off guard by the sudden assault, A sharp gasp of pure panic escaped my throat, my entire body completely losing its center of gravity, as I fell forward with a massive splash. As I plunged headfirst straight into the freezing abyss of the swimming pool, chlorinated water instantaneously flooded my nose and mouth, and a monumental wave of raw terror gripped me like an invisible spectral hand, viciously crushing my throat in a death grip. I absolutely could not breathe. My vision blacked out instantly, and a deafening chaotic buzzing erupted inside my eardrums. Countless silver air bubbles churned violently before my failing eyes, and within the blinding, distorted glare of the surface light, I could inexplicably taste the salty metallic tang of the ocean breeze, and hear the roaring thunder of crashing sea waves. Freezing ocean water was aggressively forcing its way into my burning lungs, while the unrestrained maniacal laughter of the kidnappers echoed in my head. Hey Pei Yunjo, all Chin Muyan needs to do is utter a single simple apology to save your pathetic life. Yet she would literally rather watch you drown to death than swallow her colossal pride for your sake. Why don't you tell me yourself, Ki? Does that woman actually give a single damn about you? Ah, that's right. Did she ever truly love me? Even just a microscopic fraction. Yunjo, grab onto me right now. Kin Muyan's frantic, desperate scream pierced straight through the aquatic barrier, shattering my dark, spiraling flashbacks into pieces. In a state of sheer survival instinct, I thrust my hand upward, and two firm hands aggressively clamped onto my wrists, heaving with all their might to painstakingly hoist my heavy frame up out of the water. Cough, cough, gasp, wheeze. I collapsed like a discarded, half-dead stray dog, slumping helplessly over the edge of the pool deck as violent body-racking coughs tore through my chest, desperately ejecting the trapped water from my burning airways. My incredibly expensive tailored suit was completely waterlogged, clinging tightly and uncomfortably to my trembling body, while streams of pool water continuously cascaded from my matted hair, leaving me looking thoroughly humiliated and utterly pathetic. Suppressed mocking snickers and judgmental whispers immediately rippled through the elite crowd. Wait, is that seriously CEO Chin's pathetic stay-at-home trophy husband? Wow, talk about an absolute spineless loser. I heard he used to be quite the corporate powerhouse back in the day. But look at him now, he's got less mental fortitude than a literal toddler. Honestly, if you ask me, the guy is completely unhinged. A total embarrassing joke. I forced my head up, wiping the blinding water away from my eyes, only to lock gazes with Pei Xinghui, who was sporting a deeply smug, condescending smirk not far away. He stood confidently amidst the crowd of wealthy elites, the hand that had allegedly been clutching his agonizing stomach already casually resting at his side. His face didn't harbor even a single lingering trace of distress. Every single spectator present expected me to flee in sheer unadulterated humiliation, or perhaps try to save face by quietly slipping away unnoticed. But I absolutely refused to give them that satisfaction. I aggressively struggled to hoist myself back onto my feet, drenched from head to toe, my vision swaying unsteadily as I wobbled on the spot. Then taking one heavy, deliberate step after another, I marched straight toward Chen Chen, who was cowering behind Pei Xinghui. I thrust my hand forward, violently grabbing him by his damp collar, ruthlessly ripping him out from his hiding spot behind Pei Xinghui's frame. My voice was completely ragged and hoarse, yet every single word bled with the agonizing betrayal of my soul. Pei Yunchen, I lovingly raised you for 6 solid, excruciating years. I pampered and protected you for 6 whole years. Is this truly how you reward me? Scorching tears erupted from my eyes, mixing seamlessly with the cold pool water cascading down my cheeks, making it impossible to tell the difference between the moisture and my absolute grief. Vivid memories flashed back to when he was just an infant wailing uncontrollably in the dead of night. How I had dragged my freshly stitched, agonizingly painful post-surgery body out of bed just to rock him back and forth across the nursery floor, pacing tirelessly for hours until the sun rose. I remembered the absolute magical milestone when he first babbled the word daddy. How I had ecstatically scooped him up into my arms, kissing his chubby cheeks over and over again, as my eyes brimmed with tears of pure unadulterated joy. I remembered the sheer panic when he suffered his very first critical fever, burning at 102 degrees Fahrenheit. How I had completely lost my mind with worry, unwashed, disheveled, and completely frantic, sprinting through the hospital doors with him clutched tightly against my chest, standing guard by his bedside for an entire agonizing night without blinking once. Yet today, all of that boundless devotion has culminated in this. Culminated in him weaponizing his own 2 hands to push me into a watery grave all to please another man. Chen Chen was completely paralyzed by the terrifying bloodshot rage swirling in my eyes and the raw ferocity he had never seen before. His little face turned deathly pale as he let out a sharp gasp, bursting into a hysterical ear-splitting wail. Big brother, what the hell do you think you're doing? He's just an innocent little child, oh? Pei Xinghui rushed forward with an expression of deep, exaggerated heartbreak, desperately clawing at my fingers to break my grip. Qin Muyan also lunged forward with rapid strides, utilizing all her strength to violently wrench me away from the boy. She then firmly locked my trembling frame tightly within her arms, as if trying to pacify a wildly unhinged feral beast, rhythmically stroking my soaked back with one hand, while gently running her fingers through my matted hair with the other. Shh, it's okay now. Yunjo, you're safe, everything is perfectly fine. Are you just completely exhausted and overwhelmed right now? Please just snap out of it. Don't terrify our poor child like this. Her desperate restriction pinned me with agonizing force. But the profound misery inside my soul bled far worse. I violently broke free from her suffocating embrace, staring daggers straight into her eyes, before shifting my trembling finger to point dead at Pei Xinghui, my voice sounding as chillingly sharp as crackling shards of ice. The child is completely oblivious to his own malicious ignorance. But you adults are literally forcing me to lay all the dirty facts perfectly bare. Do you honestly want me to expose exactly who orchestrated this entire dynamic? Pei Xinghui's eyes instantaneously welled up with theatrical tears, effortlessly flashing the flawless persona of a deeply wronged innocent victim. Big brother, you're supposed to be his actual grown-up father. Yet, you literally laid your aggressive hands on a fragile 6-year-old toddler in public. As for who is genuinely in the wrong here, the surrounding crowd isn't completely blind. You plunged into the pool and made a total embarrassing spectacle of yourself. So how on earth is that my fault? Why are you weaponizing me as your personal punching bag? Sure enough, the judging whispers from the onlookers erupted into an absolute roar, with the entire narrative overwhelmingly pivoting to sympathize with Pei Xinghui. Is Mr. Pei completely losing his goddamn mind? Y'all. How could he violently lash out at his own biological flesh and blood like that? Well, he's just a pathetic kept house husband. So it's no surprise his mental state is completely warped and twisted. God knows what kind of horrific abuse that poor boy suffers behind closed doors. Honestly, I'm suddenly feeling incredibly bad for CEO Keen. Imagine being shackled to such a violently abusive toxic deadbeat. Excuse of a husband. How on earth has she tolerated this garbage for so many years? Each and every venomous statement carved itself like a rusty blade directly into my bleeding heart. They were the ones who had formed a sickening alliance to manipulate me into this trap. They were the ones who literally shoved me headfirst into a suffocating abyss. Yet in the blink of an eye, I was the one branded by the masses as an unhinged, child-abusing psycho. A wave of pure, unadulterated fury violently surged through my veins. And right as I was about to completely unleash my wrath upon Pei Xinghui, Qin Muyan, having officially exhausted every single microscopic shred of her patience, brutally shoved me away. The absolute aggressive force behind her movement sent me stumbling backward several frantic steps. She unleashed a sharp, low growl. Shut your mouth, that is absolutely enough. Have you seriously not humiliated me and this family sufficiently today? Then she smoothly turned her back on me completely, facing the school principal, with a dominant tone that brooked absolutely no room for argument. Principal Lee, I am profoundly sorry for forcing you to witness such an embarrassing, pathetic circus. My husband's mental and emotional stability has been severely compromised lately. Moving forward, any kindergarten events that require paternal attendance will be officially covered by his younger uncle Pei Xinghui. Please be so kind as to update your emergency contact files immediately. Thank you so much. This is absolutely incredible. I explicitly want Uncle Star to be my brand new daddy. He's the only one who deserves to be my father. I don't want that toxic wicked villain to be my dad ever again. Chenchen instantaneously wiped away his theatrical tears, bursting into a radiant grin, as he aggressively threw his entire frame into Pei Xinghui's waiting arms, firmly wrapping his tiny hands around the man's neck, refusing to spare me even a single fleeting glance. I stood entirely paralyzed on the spot, feeling like a totally discarded, humiliated outsider who had been completely abandoned by the entire universe. I mechanically reached into my pocket to pull out my smartphone, tapping open the kindergarten's official parent group chat, only to watch a barrage of automated system notifications rapidly pop up on my screen. Pei Xinghui had just been officially added to the group by the community administrator, and his contact alias had already been boldly updated to read Chenchen's father. Almost simultaneously, a cold system alert flashed before my eyes. You have been officially removed from the group chat. Every single high society parent in Jinhai had just witnessed firsthand exactly how thoroughly pathetic, battered, and utterly defeated I was as a husband, and how stultifyingly ridiculous my entire existence had become. They saw exactly how completely powerless and non-existent my authority as a father truly was. Nothing more than a useless, redundant third wheel. My heart is still physically beating, and I haven't even drawn my last breath yet. And yet, Qin Muyan is already this sickeningly desperate to let another toxic man publicly and legitimately usurp my entire life's position. Qin Muyan completely failed to recognize the absolute dead-eyed ice fracturing across my gaze. She subtly softened her harsh, commanding tone, gliding over to stand closely by my side. As she weaponized that classic manipulative, "I'm doing this for your own good" rhetoric. Yunzhou, making this arrangement is genuinely the best outcome for your health and well-being. Moving forward, you can finally relax and enjoy a life of pure luxury and leisure, without ever having to stress over these trivial, exhausting daily chores again. I stared directly into her gorgeous, deceptive face, and an unhinged laugh suddenly escaped my lips. Oh, absolutely. since we're officially taking things to this extreme. Chenchin doesn't ever need to call me his real father again. From this exact microsecond onward, he is Chenchin's true biological dad. I genuinely hope he can successfully fulfill every single duty and obligation of a real father. And I'd hate to see him fall flat on his face and turn into a total laughingstock. Pei Xin Kui stood confidently just a few paces away, his lips curling into a deeply smug, triumphant, and utterly dismissive smirk. Qin Muyan, however, felt her perfectly sculpted brows subtly knit together in confusion. She instinctively sensed the ominous, chilling undertone laced within my words. Yet she had absolutely no clue where the actual problem was originating from. I didn't bother wasting another look on a single person in that arena. I merely spun around and walked out, leaving behind that suffocating, toxic hellhole forever. The very next morning at exactly 5 a.m., my daily morning alarm buzzed strictly on schedule. Historically, during this exact hour, I would always tiptoe out of bed with extreme caution, creeping into the kitchen to painstakingly craft a perfectly balanced, nutritious breakfast for Chenchin, before meticulously steam-pressing Qin Muyan's high-end designer corporate attire for her corporate meetings, even coordinating her high-end accessories and perfectly matching luxury shoes. I did all this because our professional live-in maid's cooking was something Chenchin completely notoriously detested, and Qin Muyan's aesthetic demands for her wardrobe were extraordinarily hypercritical, requiring everything from her inner garments to her outerwear to be utterly flawless. But this morning, I casually reached out, silenced the buzzing alarm, and simply rolled over to the other side of the mattress, unapologetically letting myself drift straight back into a deep, peaceful slumber. By the time I finally woke up, the bright morning sun was already high in the sky, jarred awake by aggressive, frantic banging on my door alongside Chenchin's hysterical tantrums and ear-splitting screams. "You absolute rotten excuse for a dad. Like, why the hell haven't you cooked my breakfast yet? Also, I am literally going to be late for school now. This is entirely your fault. With bleary, sleep-deprived eyes, I slowly unlatched and swung open the door, looking down cold-eyed at the sobbing, screaming child throwing a massive tantrum, my tone completely indifferent, detached, and laced with a subtle cutting layer of absolute mockery. I am literally not your father anymore. Go run along and find your precious real dad. The second the words left my lips, I slammed the heavy door right back in his face. But right as I nestled back into the warmth of the plush blankets, Qin Muyan's deeply irritated, sharp voice cut through the walls from the hallway. "Yunzhou, where on earth did you put my signature white designer blazer dress? You must have got it. I have an exceptionally critical corporate signing ceremony scheduled for this morning and I'm running completely out of time." I simply pulled the heavy duvet completely over my head, my voice sounding muffled and entirely disinterested from beneath the sheets. "I am literally not your personal unpaid maid. Go order the actual household staff to hunt it down for you," just outside the bedroom. An absolute stunned silence choked the air for a few tense seconds, before erupting into Chenchin's even louder venomous screams and the violent crashing of objects being shattered. The heavy master bedroom door was suddenly swung wide open, and Qin Muyan stepped inside draped in her elegant silk nightgown, extending her flawless, pale, and slender arm. She forcefully ripped open the blackout curtains in a single motion. Blinding, aggressive morning sunlight instantly flooded the dark room, and she stood silhouetted against the glare glaring down at me, with a deeply heavy, ominous tone, her words carrying a sharp interrogation. "Are you seriously still throwing a pathetic, childish tantrum over what happened yesterday?" I'm not angry in the slightest. I kept my eyes tightly shut, lying completely motionless on the bed. "Then why on earth did you refuse to cook breakfast? And completely neglect to organize my wardrobe? Isn't this exactly what you explicitly ordered me to do? Telling me to sit back and quietly enjoy a life of pure luxury and leisure." I slowly opened my eyes, staring dead into her cold, beautiful face. Furthermore, now that Chenchin officially has a shiny new daddy, these domestic chores naturally fall completely on that new daddy's shoulders. How is any of this my problem? Chenchin's obnoxious, piercing shriek instantly erupted from the doorway. "Fine, if you won't cook, then don't cook. I'll just have my awesome new daddy take me out for juicy gourmet burgers, crispy KFC, and McDonald's Ostieg. My real dad is way younger than you, infinitely more handsome than you, and 1,000,000 times more competent than you. He spoils me rotten and gives me absolutely everything I desire. He is literally 10,000 times better than you'll ever be. Shut your mouth right now, Chenchin." Qin Muyan finally realized the kid's vicious words had crossed a serious line, snapping at him with a sharp scolding. But the absolute microsecond she pivoted her gaze back onto me, she failed to witness any of the desperate, broken reactions she fully anticipated. There was no devastating heartbreak sweltering in my gaze, no explosive, blinding fury, and absolutely zero victimized grievances. I merely remained sprawled out languidly across the mattress, keeping my eyes completely closed, while my lips even harbored a faint, almost imperceptible trace of a mocking smirk. It was as though I genuinely, completely couldn't care less about this entire family anymore. Her slender, manicured fingers subtly twitched and curled at her sides, but ultimately she couldn't summon a single word to say. spinning around and aggressively storming out of the master bedroom. Moments later, the violent, thunderous slam of the front door echoed from downstairs, vibrating with such sheer force that the entire luxury mansion seemed to shudder. I slowly fluttered open my heavy, tired eyes, staring blankly at the brilliant, radiant morning sunshine cascading through the glass. It's almost time. Very, very soon. This pathetic eyesore of an existence who is allegedly inferior to Pei Xinghui in every way will completely vanish into thin air. A few agonizing days later, my biological mother had her private courier covertly deliver a heavy manila envelope. Slipped inside was the officially finalized, fully executed divorce decree. Glancing at the document, Qin Muyan's elegant signature was flawlessly rendered, showcasing her signature, high-powered corporate cursive, devoid of even a single millisecond of hesitation, and completely untainted by any subconscious pause. A brief text notification from my mother immediately flashed across my phone screen. I secretly slipped that divorce decree inside the thick stack of closing paperwork for the luxury estate I purchased for Little Star, and told her to sign the line. She didn't even bother reading a single word of it before blindly scrawling her name. I tightly gripped the cold official papers in my trembling hands, my fingertips freezing to the touch. Yet, a manic, hysterical laugh suddenly erupted from the depths of my throat. Even my very own biological mother completely failed to realize that this life-altering divorce decree officially forfeited my maternal rights and custody over Chen Chen, while simultaneously relinquishing every single penny of my rightful share in our marital assets. I am walking away completely empty-handed, leaving with absolutely nothing. Very soon, I will finally fulfill their heartwarming dream of becoming a perfect, happy family. How absolutely marvelous. Exactly 2 days later, Old Wu finally sent over the exact message I had been desperately praying to receive for ages. Mr. Pei, we have successfully uncovered the current whereabouts of your biological daughter. Our investigators finally cracked the case. Exactly 6 long years ago. She was legally adopted by a regular blue-collar couple residing in the South City district, and she currently lives right there in South City. Attached below are her precise residential address and complete background dossiers. The exact microsecond I stared down at the text message flashing on my phone, my vision instantly blurred with a sudden cascade of hot, heavy tears. 6 agonizing years. 6 whole, exhausting years have officially passed. My sweet, precious little girl. I am finally truly going to lay eyes on her at long last. What does her beautiful little face look like now? Is she healthy and well-fed or frail and thin? Has her life been comfortable and happy? Do her adoptive parents truly cherish her and treat her with boundless love? Does she harbor a deep burning resentment toward a pathetic, powerless father like me for failing to protect her back then, allowing her to be ruthlessly abandoned the literal second she drew her very first breath? The mere thought of these agonizing questions caused my physical heart to seize up in pure agonizing pain. But no matter what terrifying obstacles lie ahead, I will cross heaven and earth just to look into her eyes. I silently began packing up my meager earthly belongings. As for absolutely anything associated with Qin Muyan and Chen Chen, I genuinely lacked the stomach to ever lay a finger on them again. Those exorbitantly expensive toys, designer clothes, and luxury books, I left every single piece behind. Aside from my absolutely vital personal identification documents, all the high-end luxury watches, bespoke suits, and extravagant gifts Qin Muyan had showered me with over the years, I deliberately left every single item untouched. Those superficial material things never truly belonged to a man like me anyway. I merely held a worn basic duffel bag in my hand, containing nothing more than a few changes of casual clothes and that official divorce decree stained with my literal blood. But right as I took a step to cross the threshold of the bedroom doorway, a pale, slender hand suddenly shot out violently from the shadows behind me, clamping down on my wrist in a desperate, suffocating death grip. I spun around, crashing hard into Qin Muyan's bloodshot manic gaze. Her usually flawless hair was uncharacteristically messy and disheveled, her eyes completely rimmed with a stark, violent red, glaring daggers at me as she forced each syllable out through her tightly gritted teeth. Pei Yunzhou, are you seriously trying to run away after maliciously poisoning Pei Xinghui? Now that your sickening criminal plot has been completely exposed, you honestly think you can just pack up your bags and smoothly walk away scot-free? Poisoning. My brain temporarily short-circuited it, completely unable to process the sheer absurdity of the accusation. I stood entirely paralyzed on the spot, utterly dumbfounded. What on earth are you talking about? What poisoning? You're seriously still going to play dumb? She completely cut me off without giving me a single second to explain, refusing to listen to a single word of reason. Her physical strength suddenly manifesting with an absolutely terrifying, unnatural force. She ruthlessly yanking, dragging, and violently hauling my entire body down the hallway and into the adjacent dining room. The heavy double doors were violently slammed open, and the very first sight that crashed into my vision was Pei Xinghui, sprawled across the cold hardwood floor, his face deathly pale. His entire body was convulsing violently, his limbs twitching uncontrollably, while a thick layer of white foam bubbled sickeningly from his gaping mouth. The horrific spectacle looking like an absolute grotesque nightmare. Qin Muyan slowly pivoted her head to glare directly into my eyes. the depths of her gaze sweltering with a lethal mixture of icy wrath and absolute crushing disappointment. I've always known you harbored a pathetic deep-seated resentment toward Pei Xinghui, but I never in a million years imagined your soul could be this sickeningly evil, that you would actually scheme to murder him in cold blood. Pei Xinghui was poisoned. I absolutely did not do this. I frantically screamed, desperately fighting to defend my innocence. I literally haven't crossed the threshold of my own bedroom door a single time today. How on earth could I have possibly slipped poison into his food? You seriously still have the audacity to look me in the eye and lie? Kim Muyan let out a chilling, venomous scoff, her voice piercing through the room as she raised her volume to a deafening register. Why don't you go ahead and ask Chenchen yourself? Standing off to the side, Chenchen instinctively recoiled, shrinking his neck into his shoulders. As a sudden wave of frantic, guilty panic flashed across his childish face, he stole a fleeting glance at Pei Xinghui, who was writhing and groaning in sheer agony on the floor, before instantly thrusting his hand forward, pointing his finger squarely at my chest without a single shred of hesitation, bellowing at the top of his lungs. It was you. Just a moment ago, my toxic old dad poured a fresh glass of milk, Yedsuk, and explicitly ordered me to hand it over to my awesome new dad to drink. The second he finished swallowing it, he collapsed and turned into this, oh... The wicked bad daddy deliberately tried to murder him. This malicious accusation hit like an absolute bolt from the blue. I felt as though I had been physically struck by a catastrophic lightning bolt, my eyes stretching wide in total horrified disbelief. As I stared dead at this little monster, the exact child I had poured my soul into raising for 6 solid years. Chenchen. Why on earth are you uttering such horrific, fabricated lies? Chenchen's guilty eyes darted erratically around the room, completely lacking the courage to lock gazes with me for even a microsecond. Terrified by the raw tension, he cowered cravenly behind Qin Muyan's protective frame, peeking out with only the very top of his small head visible. Yet his mouth continued to spew venomous, hateful insults. It was definitely the toxic bad daddy. All beat him to death. Someone please beat him to absolute death. I lifted my head in complete horror, staring straight into Qin Muyan's unforgiving eyes, my voice cracking completely ragged and hoarse. I didn't commit this crime. I am entirely innocent, and no amount of frame-ups will change that. If you don't believe a single word I'm saying, you can easily pull up the security footage. The entire luxury mansion is fully rigged with surveillance cameras. One quick glance will expose the absolute truth. Shut your mouth. Qin Muyan fiercely barked, cutting me off with absolute authority, the depths of her eyes sweltering with profound disappointment and pure unadulterated disgust, alongside a subtle flash of excruciating heartache that I completely failed to comprehend. A fragile, innocent 6-year-old child. Do you honestly expect me to believe he would maliciously fabricate such a demonic lie just to frame you, Pei Yunzhou? It appears my past indulgence has completely spoiled you beyond salvation, emboldening you to become this lawless, unhinged monster, harboring a soul that is so utterly sickeningly venomous. At that exact devastating microsecond, I stared at her as my heart completely turned to ash and I slowly hung my head in defeat. I realized with absolute certainty that any further words of defense were entirely futile. She was completely unwilling to perform even the most basic logical task of reviewing the surveillance tape, blindly handing me a definitive death sentence based entirely on the weaponized words of a 6-year-old kid. Her trust was a luxury that had never ever belonged to me from the very start. With her face completely shrouded in a dark, ominous scowl, Qin Muyan refused to spare another glance at my pathetic state, aggressively snatching her smartphone to place an urgent call. Exactly 3 agonizing minutes later, 2 massive, towering elite bodyguards materialized at the threshold of the dining room doorway. Her voice cut through the air like a razor-sharp blade, completely devoid of even a single microsecond of human warmth. Drag him down to the dark depths of the basement immediately. Give him a brutal, unforgettable taste of real discipline, and ensure he thoroughly learns his goddamn lesson, regarding exactly what lines he is permitted to cross and what boundaries he must never violate. The 2 towering bodyguards lunged forward without a single moment of hesitation, ruthlessly pinning my arms from both sides and lifting me off my feet. Qin Muyan, you have absolutely no right to inflict this horrific abuse upon me. I violently thrashed and struggled with every fiber of my being, yet she completely tuned out my desperate screams as if I were a ghost, tenderly bending down to, with extreme caution, scoop up the convulsing Pei Xinghui from the hardwood floor, frantically preparing to rush him over to the emergency room. Right as she reached the exit of the mansion, her hurried footsteps suddenly faltered for a brief second, keeping her back turned entirely toward me. She coldly dropped a final instruction, her voice incredibly soft and detached, as if she were merely ordering the disposal of a trivial piece of absolute garbage. Mind your aggressive force and maintain proper boundaries. Just don't beat him into a critical condition. Don't make it too severe. The heavy front door was violently slammed shut with a thunderous echoing boom. And at that exact heartbreaking microsecond right before the door completely sealed, I witnessed the groaning Pei Xinghui, tightly cradled in Qin Muyan's protective arms, slowly pivot his head to mockingly stick out his tongue at me, It was the ultimate undisputed posture of a triumphant conqueror, overflowing with pure smugness, frantic arrogance, and sadistic malice. Qin Muyan. I bellowed at the top of my lungs, but the very next fraction of a second, one of the beefy bodyguards unhesitatingly hoisted his massive fist and brutally smashed it directly into my face, completely choking out the rest of my words. The violent blow carried their absolute unfiltered strength, sending me crashing heavily onto the cold floor, my vision instantly going completely pitch black, as an intense deafening ringing echoed continuously through my ears, and my mouth instantly filled with the metallic iron taste of blood. Dude, you swung way too damn hard. Are you trying to catch a murder charge? The other bodyguard gasped in pure shock, scolding his partner in a frantic whisper. The assailant merely spat on the ground, his face twisting into a sinister, sadistic grin. What the hell are you stressing about? Did you completely miss CEO Chin's dismissive attitude just now? Her entire mind and soul are completely hyperfixated on Mr. Pei Xinghui. So why would she ever care whether this pathetic loser lives or dies? He squatted down aggressively, clamping his hand around my jaw and forcing me to lock eyes with his utterly repulsive, sickening face, his voice dropping to an ominous hush whisper. Besides, Mr. Pei Xinghui privately gave us explicit orders. As long as we don't literally kill him, we are to torture him within an inch of his life. He promised he'll completely cover for us no matter what happens. Hearing those horrifying words, I felt an overwhelming wave of dark cosmic irony wash over me. It was just too damn pathetic and hilarious. Before I could even scramble to drag myself back up, the two brutes ruthlessly pinned me flat against the floor once again. Mr. Pei Xinghui explicitly mentioned that these useless hands of yours touch things they had absolutely no right to touch. One brute forcefully grabbed my arm, pinning it flat against the hard surface, while the other smoothly retrieved a pair of heavy metallic pliers from his deep pocket. What the hell do you think you're doing? I thrashed in sheer, unadulterated terror, but my frantic struggles were entirely futile. My physical strength was completely non-existent compared to these towering monsters. The icy, chilling metallic edge of the pliers pressed tightly against my fingernail. Snap! The nerve endings in my fingertips flashed with pure agony. The absolutely excruciating torture of having my fingernail violently ripped raw from the flesh forced a piercing, blood-curdling scream from my throat, a horrific sound that barely even sounded human. My entire body convulsed and twitched violently from the shock, as a wave of icy cold sweat instantaneously drenched every square inch of my clothes, and waves of dizzying darkness swirled before my eyes, bringing me to the absolute brink of blacking out completely. But the heartless bastards didn't show a single ounce of mercy or stop. In the next agonizing second, the icy cold blade of a pair of heavy scissors slid directly against my raw scalp. Mr. Pei Xinghui explicitly mentioned that your long hair is an absolute eyesore, so he graciously ordered us to give you a much sleeker, trendier haircut. Snip-snap, the sharp blades aggressively sliced through the air, as thick, tangled clumps of dark hair were ruthlessly hacked away, showering down onto the cold floorboards, like a pile of completely worthless, discarded trash. By this point, the sheer intensity of the agony had left me utterly numb, reducing me to nothing more than a soulless, hollow mannequin, completely at the mercy of their sadistic whims. But the horrific nightmare was nowhere near over. They ruthlessly pinned my battered body flat against the ground, unleashing a relentless barrage of heavy fists and violent kicks that rained down upon me. Their heavy leather boots brutally stomped and crashed into my spine, each devastating blow sending a sickening shockwave through me, flashing back to those long-forgotten nights, back when Qin Muyan would wrap her slender arms tightly around my frame, her warm hand gently, soothingly stroking my back, as she tenderly lulled me to sleep. During those blissful moments, I genuinely mistook her actions for pure unconditional love. But now the cruel reality exposes it as nothing more than a dark omen of my destruction. Within minutes, I was beaten to an absolute pulp, my face completely swollen and bruised, blood pouring uncontrollably from my nose and gashed lips, as a bitter mixture of salty tears and warm crimson fluid dripped down my chin, leaving me looking utterly pathetic and defeated. I lay completely paralyzed and broken on the floor, my clothes torn to absolute shreds from the frantic, futile struggle, exposing the twisted, hideous old surgical scar slicing across my abdomen. One of the bodyguards mockingly nudged my limp torso with the tip of his boot, his cold gaze locking squarely onto the jagged tissue, letting out a sharp, venomous scoff, brimming with absolute, unadulterated disdain. Mr. Pei Xinghui specifically noted this as well, that this hideous, repulsive scar of yours is an absolute eyesore on your body. So he suggested we do you a massive favor and make it look a whole lot prettier. The second the words left his mouth, he retrieved a gleamed razor-sharp hunting knife from his belt. The icy lethal draft of the blade pressed flush against the old scar on my stomach. No, please, I am begging you. Don't do this, I whimpered, squeezing out the absolute last shred of my remaining strength to plead, my voice completely shattered and ragged, barely even forming coherent words. Yet they merely responded with sadistic, mocking laughter, and violently dragged the blade downward. An absolutely indescribable, blinding explosion of agony. Instantaneously vaporized and consumed every single one of my cognitive senses. I watched in horror as a heavy torrent of crimson blood came erupting out of my flesh, and their twisted, monstrous grins blurred erratically before my fading vision. The entire world suddenly went completely mute, replaced by a sharp, piercing ring in my ears. I could feel my life force rapidly draining away directly on the brink of death, as my vision began to completely fracture and dissolve into absolute darkness. My vision was completely dyed a horrific crimson red, and the entire world spun around me in a violent, dizzying vertigo. Maybe it's better to just die right here, right now. I am just so incredibly, completely exhausted. But right as I was about to let this welcoming thought swallow my consciousness whole, a faint sound suddenly echoed from the deep recesses of my mind. It sounded incredibly distant and desperately muffled, as if drifting across the void from a completely different universe. The soft, innocent voice of a little girl. "Daddy! Is that my precious daughter calling out to me? It has to be an auditory hallucination born of my dying mind, right? Daddy, no, I absolutely have to survive this." This singular, desperate thought struck my soul like a blinding bolt of lightning, completely ripping apart the endless, suffocating abyss of darkness. I must survive at all costs. I absolutely refused to die before I finally looked into my daughter's eyes. I thrashed and fought to force my heavy eyelids open, desperately trying to part my lips to scream back a response. But nothing came out save for a ragged, sickening spray of bloody foam. And with that, my entire universe collapsed into pitch black oblivion. I have absolutely no idea how many hours or days slipped past, but I eventually jolted awake on the freezing concrete floor of the basement. The massive luxury mansion was completely deserted and devoid of life, shrouded in a heavy death-like silence. The only sound left was a constant, agonizingly sharp ringing in my ears, while a blinding, nerve-shredding explosion of agony radiated from my mutilated finger, forcing a sharp, ragged gasp down my raw throat. The moment I desperately attempted to shift my battered frame, the absolute sheer intensity of the physical pain threatened to black out my vision entirely. Yet a burning primal instinct far more powerful than any physical trauma anchored my soul. I need to escape this hellhole. Right now, this very second, I have to go find my long-lost daughter, digging my trembling elbows into the cold floorboards for leverage. I agonizingly, inch by excruciating inch, dragged my broken body back up onto my feet. Every micro-movement felt like 1,000 jagged blades were simultaneously slicing through my raw flesh. I stumbled and reeled blindly over to my packed luggage, unzipping it with shaking hands, and retrieved that official divorce decree now completely stained with my own fresh blood, placing it front and center on the coffee table. Without wasting another second or casting a single glance backward, I limped heavily toward the main exit. The engine roared to life with a deafening, thunderous snarl, shattering the eerie silence of the midnight sky. I locked my bleeding, mangled hands tightly around the steering wheel and slammed the accelerator pedal completely flat against the floorboards. The vehicle tore out of the compound, breaking free from the golden cage that had imprisoned me in a fake marriage for 7 agonizing years. Barreling down the highway at breakneck speeds, heading straight towards South City. In my rearview mirror, that brilliantly illuminated opulent mansion grew smaller and more distant, shrinking down to a mere speck, until it was entirely swallowed up and wiped away by the dark horizon. For the first time in 7 long years, a genuine, unyielding spark of life ignited within my eyes. Meanwhile, inside the ultra-luxurious penthouse executive office of the Jinhai Chin Corporation, the thick atmosphere was so incredibly tense and suffocating that it felt entirely radioactive. The 2 black and blue bodyguards were kneeling on the freezing marble floor like absolute dead dogs, lacking even the basic courage to lift their heads. Kim Moyan's personal assistant stood rigidly off to the side, respectfully debriefing her CEO Chin. These 2 spineless cowards managed to stay off the grid for a whole month. I pulled every single string and mobilized our entire network, before we finally managed to hunt them down and drag them back. Seated behind her executive desk, Kim Moyan had completely lost every shred of her usual elegant poise and icy composure. Heavy pitch-black dark circles bags sagged beneath her hollow eyes. Her hair was a completely unkempt mess, and her bloodshot eyes flashed with a manic glare, looking exactly like a feral-cornered beast trapped inside a cage, who hadn't tasted a single second of peaceful sleep in ages. 1 agonizing month. A whole uninterrupted month had slipped away. She had completely exhausted every ounce of power and leverage at her disposal just to track me down, unleashing elite private investigators, manipulating law enforcement connections, and even deploying underground networks across both sides of the law. Yet I had seemingly vanished like a single drop of water evaporating into a vast ocean, leaving absolutely zero digital footprint or paper trail. Completely wiped from the face of the earth, now her absolute last shred of desperate hope hung entirely on these 2 thugs, the last people to see him alive. Her predatory gaze slowly shifted onto the trembling men, her voice dropping to a sub-zero register, devoid of even a microsecond of human warmth, sounding like a chilling draft blowing straight out of the depths of hell. "Start talking. What exact horrors did you inflict upon him that night?" The first bodyguard violently shuddered, his voice cracking as he stuttered out the words. We We violently ripped out his fingernails, and hacked away at his long hair. So yes. What else did you do? Kim Muyan abruptly bolted upright from her chair, viciously driving her foot directly into the bodyguard's chest. The razor-sharp stiletto heel sank into his vital points with pinpoint accuracy, carrying an absolutely terrifying amount of physical force that instantly sent his massive frame cartwheeling backward, crashing brutally into the solid concrete wall. She stormed forward, ruthlessly grinding the sharp heel of her shoe directly into the man's face, applying such crushing pressure that it threatened to shatter his cheekbones into dust. Spit out every single horrific detail without skipping a single syllable. The remaining thug nearly lost his mind from pure unadulterated terror, groveling flat against the floor as he scrambled to confess. We used a hunting knife to slice open the old surgical scar on his abdomen, but every single bit of it was strictly orchestrated by Mr. Pei Xinghui. He explicitly ordered us to torture him within an inch of his life. He said as long as we left him with a single breath of life, it was completely fine. He swore that he would personally take the fall for everything. We simply didn't possess the balls to defy his explicit orders. Pei Xinghui. Qin Muyan's foot froze instantly in midair, her bloodshot, eyes stretching wide, filled with pure, unadulterated disbelief. The very same Pei Xinghui who had allegedly dragged her back from the literal brink of death years ago. The fragile, delicate man she had fiercely shielded for so many long years, enshrining him at the absolute center of her heart. Could he truly be the monster who orchestrated such a sadistic medieval torture session against his own biological brother? That's completely impossible. You absolute vermin still have the audacity to fabricate lies. How dare you orchestrate a malicious smear campaign against his character? Qin Muyan's rage completely boiled over as she violently ground her heel down, causing the bodyguard to instantly unleash a high-pitched, blood-curdling screech like a slaughtered pig. We swear on our lives, CEO Qin. Every single syllable coming out of our mouths is the absolute concrete truth. We have ironclad proof. We literally have a secret voice recording. The desperate man frantically clung to this audio file like a dying man grasping at a lifeline, fumbling erratically with trembling hands to retrieve his smartphone from his inner jacket pocket, his fingers shaking violently as he tapped on a specific audio file. Pei Xinghui's distinct voice instantly echoed through the speaker with chilling clarity. That voice was incredibly cold, sinister, and overflowing with absolute malice. A complete polar opposite contrast to the gentle, sophisticated angel persona he always put on around her. That absolute waste of space Pei Yunzhou has pushed my buttons for the very last time. I want you to torture him within an inch of his pathetic life. Just make sure the useless bastard doesn't actually end up dead. He still needs to act as my ultimate meat shield after all. Taking the fall for me is the only actual worth that pathetic loser possesses. Every single syllable that left the speaker felt like a razor-sharp blade, viciously stabbing deep into the rawest parts of Qin Muyan's chest. Act as my meat shield. Her mind suddenly flashed back to the dismissive words she had once arrogantly hurled at Han Muyu. Pei Xinghui's soul is far too pure and innocent to handle hardships, but a thick-skinned man like Pei Yunzhou can easily endure it. It turns out that she wasn't the only monster weaponizing my life to absorb damage. Her precious Pei Xinghui, the fragile soul she had coddled and protected for nearly a decade. The man she genuinely believed was an angel was exploiting his own brother in the exact same sadistic manner. He deliberately treated his biological brother, the very shield absorbing his life's disasters, like a piece of trash to be tortured at will. If this audio recording was indeed the absolute truth, then what on earth had she been doing during these past 7 agonizing years? Her mind violently and uncontrollably flooded with the horrific, blood-drenched images of that living room floor. The splattered trails of fresh crimson blood smeared across the ground. The hunting knife caked in thick, sticky fluids. The butchered clumps of dark hair scattered across the room. And the blood-soaked fingernails ripped violently from their bed. She could suddenly hear me weeping hysterically, howling in absolute unbearable physical agony, and thrashing in a state of pure unadulterated despair. Yet, where exactly was she while all of that horrific torture was taking place? She was tenderly cradling Pei Xinghui in her arms, walking out that front door without a single shred of remorse or looking back. Take these 2 worthless pieces of absolute trash. Qin Muyan's voice echoed with a sub-zero chill sounding as if it came straight from the depths of hell. Each deliberate word dripping with cold calculation, brimming with absolute bone-deep hatred. Chop them into mincemeat and throw them to the feral dogs. The thug's frantic begging for mercy grew distant before completely fading. Qin Muyan aggressively snatched the smartphone containing the audio proof and stormed out of the executive suite like a chaotic, destructive hurricane. She was charging straight to track down Pei Xinghui, determined to confront him face to face and drag the truth out of his mouth. Meanwhile, back at the Qin family luxury mansion, compared to just 1 month ago, the once pristine estate had become completely unrecognizable. Priceless luxury ornaments and high-end decor lay shattered across the cold floor, The designer carpets were heavily stained and littered with decaying trash, and a thick, suffocating stench of decay, utter neglect, and total chaos heavily permeated the air. The very fraction of a second, Chin Mo-yeon pushed open the heavy front doors. A decorative throw pillow came hurtling through the air, smashing squarely into her chest. Pei Sing-hui sat slumped on the couch with deep, heavy, dark circles framing his eyes, mindlessly puffing on a cigarette, his entire face twisted into an expression of absolute irritation and explosive impatience. The moment his eyes locked onto her, he immediately unleashed a torrent of bitter complaints, opening the floodgates of his toxic resentment, with absolutely zero intention of stopping. Chin Mo-yeon, just look at this absolute disaster. Look at how your precious son has been completely ruined by Pei Yunjo's coddling. He aggressively gestured toward a far corner of the unkempt living room, where Chenchin was currently wailing hysterically on the dirty floorboards, his hair a tangled, unwashed mess, his face looking sickly pale and visibly malnourished, and his clothes completely caked in filth. There wasn't a single trace left of the squeaky clean, pristine young master, who used to look like a pampered prince back when I poured my soul into taking care of him. Pei Sing-hui's toxic tirade continued to escalate, his voice growing increasingly frantic and unhinged with every passing second. The brat is a nightmare of a picky eater. He refuses to touch this, he completely rejects that, and he does nothing but smash expensive things and throw temper tantrums. I am seriously being driven to the absolute brink of insanity by this kid, and all you ever do is bury yourself in your precious work, never stepping foot inside this house, leaving this entire broken disaster completely on my shoulders, and expecting me to play the role of his personal servant. Do you even possess a shred of love for me anymore, or do you just not care about this family? If I knew I'd be subjected to this hell, I would have never saved your life back then. I should have just left you to rot and die. Then I wouldn't be trapped here enduring this absolute torture. I endured this exact same lifestyle for 7 long agonizing years. I've been grinding and surviving in this absolute hellhole for 7 long years. 7 long years. Over 2,500 grueling days and nights. Yet I had never once uttered a single word of complaint, keeping the entire household meticulously organized and spotless, while attending to our child's every single need with unconditional devotion. Kim Mo-yeon stared dead at the fiercely complaining bitter man standing before her, as if she were looking directly at a total stranger. She didn't waste a single breath on words, aggressively hurling the smartphone flat onto the coffee table right in front of him. Those 2 elite bodyguards, Mike. I tracked them down. Pei Sing-hui's toxic tirade cut off, instantly vanishing into thin air. His trembling hand scooped up the phone, and the exact millisecond the audio file began to play, his complexion turned completely ghostly ink pale. Every single ounce of color drained from his face instantly. They explicitly confessed that you were the mastermind behind everything. Kim Mo-yeon took a menacing step forward, cornering him with her glare, her eyes cutting through him like razor-sharp blades, ordering them to violently rip out Yunjo's fingernails, brutally hack away at his hair, and even maliciously slice open his old surgical scar. A flash of absolute, unadulterated panic surged through Pei Sing-hui's eyes, but it vanished in a mere fraction of a second. He instantaneously masked it, putting on a deeply wronged, pitiful expression, his eyes welling up with tears on absolute command, as heavy droplets swirled precariously in his eyelids. Chin Mo-yeon, are you seriously choosing to believe those low-life thugs over me? Do you honestly think I am capable of being that kind of monster? How could I ever inflict such horrific cruelty upon my own biological brother? They clearly just lost control and went way too far with their brutal beating and now they're just spinning wild lies to frame me so they can escape your wrath. How could you possibly doubt my innocence? His eyes were completely bloodshot and tearful, as heavy streams of tears came pouring down his cheeks, making him look utterly heartbroken, shattered, and flawlessly innocent. Way back when I literally dragged your broken body out of that horrific car crash to save your life. And when you claimed you had to marry Pei Yunjo just to keep me safe. I swallowed my pride and endured all of that agonizing pain. Yet even to us this very day, I am not even officially recognized as your husband. Even your brat of a son treats me like an absolute enemy. And now you don't even believe me, since it's blindingly obvious that neither you nor your son wants me around. Then I'll just leave, I'll pack up and disappear forever. Is that what you want? He made a dramatic, aggressive show of storming toward the main exit. Yet his eyes covertly darted back to scan Chin Mo-yeon's reaction. If this were the past, the mere fraction of a second he showed a hint of being wronged. Kim Mo-yeon's heart would have instantly melted with intense guilt, wanting nothing more than to immediately rush over, wrap him in her arms, and soothe his frayed nerves with the tenderest whispers. But staring at his tear-streaked face at this exact moment, and bearing witness to his flawlessly practiced theatrical performance, Kim Mo-yeon felt nothing but an indescribable wave of pure irritation and sub-zero disgust wash over her soul. She stood completely rooted to the spot, refusing to budge a single inch. They always say true men don't shed tears so easily. Could it be that she had actually falsely accused him? Just as her iron resolve began to waver, and a glimmer of smug triumph flashed through Pei Xinghui's deceptive eyes, little Chen, who had been sobbing silently on the floor, abruptly ceased his weeping. The toddler violently bolted up to his feet, his tiny trembling finger pointing squarely at Pei Xinghui, as he unleashed a deafening raw scream with every ounce of physical strength in his small body. His high-pitched innocent voice was completely brimming with explosive fury. Get out of our house right now. This is all your fault. You're the monster who maliciously drove my daddy away. It was all you. You forced me to lie to mommy and say that daddy was trying to poison you. That's the only reason daddy left us in pure heartbreak. You're a disgusting villain. The biggest, baddest monster ever. The toddler's raw, unfiltered words detonated like a sudden clap of thunder, shattering the silence of the massive, empty living room. The smug, triumphant smirk on Pei Xinghui's face instantly paralyzed, every single drop of color draining from his complexion, until he looked as completely deathly pale as a sheet of paper. Qin Muyan's head snapped violently around to look at her young son. Chen. What exact words did you just say? Repeat that to me right now. Chen scrambled up from the dirty floorboards, viciously throwing his small arms around Qin Muyan's leg, wailing hysterically, as he choked out the truth through broken, hyperventilating gasps, tears, and mucus completely smearing across his entire face. Daddy was completely framed. New daddy was the one who maliciously brainwashed me to say those things. He told me old daddy was evil for stealing mommy away from him. So he ordered me to violently push daddy into the deep pool. He even explicitly ordered me to lie to mommy and say daddy sneaked poison into his milk to kill him. He is the absolute monster who forced my daddy away. I want my real daddy to come back home. I just want my daddy, Every single syllable leaving the toddler's lips felt like a massive sledgehammer brutally smashing into Qin Muyan's temples, leaving her completely dizzy, disoriented, and hyperventilating from the shock, as a deafening thunderous roar echoed continuously through her ears. Her vision violently blacked out in suffocating waves, as Pei Xinghui frantically waved his hands in total panic, his voice spiking into a sharp, piercing shriek. No, Chen is lying through his teeth. How can you possibly believe the random ramblings of a toddler? He is spouting absolute nonsense. Yan, you can't believe a single word he says. Chen is a dirty liar. Qin Muyan's mind suddenly exploded with the echo of the exact words she had screamed at me just a month ago. Would a 6-year-old child seriously fabricate such elaborate lies just to frame you? It turns out a child absolutely would. And it turns out that this seemingly gentle, saintly man standing right beside her, the very guy she had fiercely protected for so many long years, had been maliciously pulling the strings and brainwashing their son in the shadows, exploiting a 6-year-old boy's pure innocence and desperate dependence, to engineer one toxic venomous lie after another, right in the epicenter of this absolute mental chaos. Repressed memories from her past suddenly violently crashed into her mind like a runaway cinematic reel. A torrential blinding downpour, the piercing blinding glare of oncoming headlights, the nauseating suffocating stench of leaking gasoline mixed with thick coppery blood. Through a blinding fog of excruciating physical trauma, she faintly remembered being desperately and violently dragged out from the crushed, mangled driver's seat. Her vision was a completely blurred mess, and her consciousness was rapidly slipping away into oblivion, leaving her just barely able to make out the silhouette of a tall, broad-shouldered man who was kneeling on the freezing, rain-soaked asphalt right beside her, relentlessly pumping her chest to perform desperate CPR over and over again. His profile was starkly silhouetted in the halo of the car's headlights, completely drenched in a chaotic mix of fresh blood, grime, and heavy rain. His brows fiercely knitted in intense panic, yet his eyes burned with an absolutely unyielding determination to save her. But the exact moment she finally jolted awake from her deep coma, the person sitting vigil by her bedside, refusing to leave her side for even a second, was Pei Xinghui. He explicitly claimed that he was the lone hero who saved her life, and she blindly believed his narrative without a shadow of a doubt. From that very day forward, she enshrined Pei Xinghui as her ultimate savior, showering him with absolute unconditional love, pampering, and fierce protection, even going so far as to ruthlessly sacrifice another man's entire life, just to ensure his absolute comfort and safety. But now that ancient memory was suddenly snapping into razor-sharp HD clarity. Those eyes, that distinct facial structure, and that profound, desperate expression, it wasn't Pei Xinghui at all. It was me. It was actually me. While she was actively hovering on the absolute brink of death, I was the one who literally traded my own life force to drag her back from the gates of hell. The jade bracelet? Qin Muyan snapped her head around her glare, pinning Pei Xinghui to the spot, her voice completely dry, cracked, and raspy, as if she were painfully forcing the syllables out of her raw throat. You swore on your life that you were the one who saved me back then. So where is that specific heirloom bracelet I shoved into your hands right before blacking out? Produce it right now. Pei Xinghui was so completely paralyzed by her terrifying aura that he took a frantic step back, his eyes darting around erratically, as he began to stammer and lose his words. I must have misplaced it somewhere. I totally forgot where it is. That nightmare happened literally ages ago. Who could possibly remember such a minor detail? You forgot. Kim Muyan violently surged forward, violently wrapping her fingers around his collar, grinding out her words through clenched teeth, each syllable vibrating with a lethal, calculated weight, overflowing with bone-deep hatred and suffocating despair. I never handed over a single piece of jewelry that night. The true savior who risked his life to rescue me was Pei Yunzhou. Isn't that right, Ma? She was running a dangerous bluff, and his instantaneous reaction completely exposed his guilt to the light of day. The absolute last shred of his innocent, saintly masquerade was violently ripped away. He completely ceased his pathetic trembling, wiping away any trace of his wronged persona, and slowly tilted his head back, unleashing a highly twisted, mocking sneer of pure triumph. So what if it was actually him? Qin Muyan. What the hell does uncovering the truth at this point change for you now? Does it even matter? He aggressively leaned directly into her face, whispering every single word, like a barrage of needles heavily coated in lethal venom. The man is already completely gone, ruthlessly and systematically driven away by your own two hands. The only partner standing right by your side at this very second, and the one who actually built a family and raised a son with you, is me. His voice suddenly spiked to a deafening hysterical pitch, becoming incredibly sharp, piercing, and grating, sounding exactly like the ominous, screeching wail of a nocturnal owl. You were the blind idiot who misidentified your own ultimate savior, and now you expect to just wallow in regret. You are way too late. A deafening, thunderous slap suddenly echoed across the room as her palm brutally collided with Pei Xinghui's face, carrying such an absolute terrifying amount of physical force that it sent him violently staggering backward across the floorboards, as a thick stream of fresh crimson blood instantly began leaking from the corner of his mouth. You absolute monster, you're a disgusting villain. Little Chen suddenly charged forward like a mini hurricane, unleashing his tiny fist to relentlessly rain blows down upon Pei Xinghui, wailing hysterically at the absolute top of his lungs, as he screamed through his tears. You brainwashed my mommy. You maliciously forced my daddy away. You are the absolute worst monster in the world. Pei Xinghui winced in sharp pain from the continuous blows, a volatile, sinister wave of fury instantly surging through his veins. He suddenly unleashed an aggressive burst of force, ruthlessly shoving Chen away, viciously spewing venomous, toxic insults, his eyes completely wide with unhinged madness. You pathetic little brat. Do you honestly believe that kissing her ass right now is going to make her suddenly want you? You aren't even her biological flesh and blood. She absolutely despises your biological mother for backstabbing and betraying her, and she loathes a worthless little bastard like you even more. She abandoned you a long-ass time ago, so you can completely give up on that pathetic delusion? Wah! Chen was violently thrown flat onto the hard floorboards, instantly suffering a total emotional breakdown, as he wailed hysterically, completely helpless, shattered, and swimming in deep despair. Qin Muyan stared dead at the explosive toxic chaos unfolding right before her eyes, feeling exactly as though she were trapped inside a highly surreal, twisted nightmare, forcing down the near uncontrollable urge to murder this pathetic excuse of a man on the spot. Her shaking fingers frantically dialed her personal assistant's number. Assistant Lee 6, long years ago, I explicitly ordered you to dump my daughter at a local orphanage. I need to know her exact pinpoint location this very second. A daughter? We actually share a biological daughter. Yes, Pei Yunzhou must have definitely vanished to go look for our little girl. The exact moment the word daughter echoed in the room, Pei Xinghui acted as though he had just heard the most hilarious cosmic joke in human history. He suddenly erupted into a bout of pure hysterical laughter, doubling over in absolute amusement, until literal tears began streaming down his face. Qin Muyan, are you seriously still living in a total dream world? He locked his predatory gaze onto her, his eyes completely overflowing with a manic, sadistic pleasure. Do you honestly believe that pathetic waste of space's daughter is still breathing? Let me shatter reality for you. The very second that baby girl left the womb, my hired thugs immediately snatched her and threw her into the freezing barren snowdrifts out in the wilderness. It was literally tens of degrees below freezing, and she was nothing but a fragile newborn infant. How many minutes do you honestly think she lasted out there? She froze to death a lifetime ago, starved to absolute death, and her tiny bones were picked completely clean by ravenous feral dogs until absolutely nothing remained. You want to track her down? Try waiting until the next lifetime. Qin Muyan's eyes nearly split wide with absolute murderous fury, every drop of blood in her veins seemingly freezing into solid ice at that exact millisecond. Never in her entire life had she felt such a psychotic, overwhelming urge to hack a human being into a million pieces, grind his bones into dust, and scatter his ashes to the wind. Drag this disgusting monster out of my sight right now. Throw him in the absolute deepest corner of the basement. She roared savagely at the security guard stationed at the entrance, every single syllable overflowing with thick coppery blood and bone-deep hatred. I'm going to make him pray for the sweet release of death. Every single day, every single agonizing hour, and every single waking minute he will drown in absolute regret, forever having been born into this world. The elite guards instantly stormed into the room like a tactical unit, completely ignoring Patient Hui's hysterical shriek and frantic struggles, as they brutally dragged him toward the mansion's dark basement like a piece of dead roadkill, staring at the spot where Patient Hui's pathetic figure had finally vanished. Little Chen slowly scrambled up from the dirty floorboards, viciously wrapping his small arms around Qin Muyan's leg, choking out the words through his heavy tears, his tiny fragile body trembling completely out of control. "Mommy, please let me go with you to track down my real daddy, okay? If I just beg for his forgiveness and admit I was wrong. I know Daddy will definitely forgive me and come home." Qin Muyan dropped to her knees, fiercely pulling her young son into a tight embrace, feeling the violent tremors racking his small frame and hearing his heartbreaking, submissive pleas, as her heart was violently ripped to shreds, leaving her soul completely mutilated and bleeding out. She had been a complete monster. They had all been absolutely tragically wrong. "Okay." She squeezed her son tightly against her chest, her voice completely raspy and broken, yet laced with an unyielding determination. "We are going to track him down this very second, no matter what corner of the earth he is hiding in it. We will stop at absolutely nothing to bring him home." Meanwhile, over in Nanchang, the grueling 1-month deadline had finally arrived. My heart felt as though it were precariously suspended over a dark abyss, paralyzed by a chaotic mix of intense anticipation and absolute terror. Following Luo Qingming as he walked into his dimly lit private study, I watched intently as he retrieved a confidential manila envelope from his heavy steel safe, his long, elegant fingers slowly sliding it across the desk directly toward me. "The concrete truth you've been desperately searching for is sealed right inside here." I took a sharp, ragged breath, my trembling fingers slowly reaching out toward the mysterious document package. But the exact millisecond my fingertips were about to brush against the paper, my phone violently erupted into a loud, jarring ringtone, instantly shattering the heavy, suffocating atmosphere hanging over the room. The caller ID showed it was Nyanyan's kindergarten homeroom teacher, and her frantic tone was overflowing with pure panic. "Is this Nyanyan's father? Am I speaking to Nyanyan's real dad? You need to rush over to the school campus this very instant. Nyanyan just got into a massive, violent physical brawl with the other kids right at the front gates. We literally can't even pry them apart. Nyanyan got into a vicious physical fight." My heart instantly seized up with intense panic, and I completely forgot all about that confidential file folder. I abruptly bolted up from my seat, frantically yelling at Luo Qingming in a total rush. "We need to get to the school this exact second something happened to Nyanyan." A chaotic crowd had already gathered right at the main gates of the campus. Right in the dead center of the crowd, Nyanyan's tiny face was flushed bright crimson, looking exactly like a feral, fiercely protective little beast, as she desperately guarded a delicate silver necklace tightly clenched inside her fist. Standing directly opposite her was a wealthy-looking boy around 6 years old, who was aggressively yanking on the opposite end of the silver chain, screaming at the top of his lungs, his tiny face completely distorted with absolute rage. "This belongs to my daddy. It's his custom necklace. Give it back to me, you disgusting little thief." That aggressive boy was none other than Chen, and standing right beside him was the one woman I swore I would never see again in this lifetime, Qin Muyan. She looked infinitely more haggard and broken than she did a mere month ago, her eyes deeply sunken, her complexion completely ghostly pale, and her entire physical frame noticeably withered and frail, as if the living soul had been brutally drained right out of her body. Nyanyan's eyes were completely bloodshot and tearful, refusing to loosen her white-knuckle grip on the chain for even a millisecond, choking out a fierce defensive cry through her heavy tears. "This is the ultimate treasure my daddy left for me. It doesn't belong to you." The absolute instant I locked eyes onto the specific design of that silver chain, my hand violently snapped up to touch the exact identical necklace resting against my own collarbone. That was the custom couple's jewelry that Qin Muyan and I had passionately designed together during our honeymoon phase. A solid platinum series featuring a delicate, openable, circular locket pendant that securely hid our intimate couple's photo deep inside. We each possessed one unique piece, but the exact moment our child was born, I could never recall seeing her wear it ever again. Could it be that she had secretly left her precious half of the set to our abandoned daughter? Nyanyan is actually my true biological daughter. My brain instantaneously went completely blank, leaving absolutely zero time to process the reality of the situation. I violently lunged forward through the crowd, ruthlessly scooping Nyanyan up and wrapping her in a fierce protective embrace. "Daddy!" She was visibly startled by my sudden explosive movement, slowly tilting her tiny face upward to stare at me with absolute confusion. With violently trembling hands, I quickly unclasped the silver chain from around my own neck and held it right alongside Nyanyan's piece, fitting together perfectly like two missing puzzle pieces. The two distinct necklaces were completely flawless mirror images of one another. "Look at this Nyanyan," I choked out as a torrential downpour of tears came bursting from my eyes. I could absolutely no longer hold back my voice, which was now trembling and shaking uncontrollably. Every single syllable completely soaked in choked up tears. "I am genuinely your real father. Your actual biological daddy. Shut. You're not my daddy. Go away. You're a bad person. You're a villain who snatched me away. My precious daughter." Nyanyan whimpered and babbled under her breath, massive heavy teardrops cascading down from her beautiful wide eyes. She extended her tiny hands and desperately clamped them around my neck, burying her small face directly against my shoulder, before letting out a loud piercing burst of absolute uncontrollable sobbing. You really are my daddy. I knew deep down in my heart that you would never delete me from your life. I held her tightly in a fierce embrace, feeling the delicate, warm presence of her tiny frame, sensing her warm, streaming tears, completely drenching and soaking through my clothes. That hollow void in my chest, empty for 6 agonizing years, was finally filled to the brim. The staggering, overwhelming euphoria of reclaiming what I had lost surged exactly like a violent tidal wave, completely drowning my system. "Daddy!" A sharp, piercing shriek instantly shattered this brief oasis of warmth. Chenchin came charging over like a maniac, desperately trying to latch onto and anchor himself to my leg. His tiny face a messy blur of tear stains and pure frantic desperation. "Daddy, it's me, Chenchin. I downloaded my mistakes. I know I was wrong." "Daddy, please don't banish me and throw me away." My entire physical framework instantly locked up and went rigid. I cast my gaze downward, staring coldly at him. This exact child I had poured my life into raising for 6 long years. A turbulent storm of conflicting heavy emotions churned inside my chest, a mix of searing heartbreak and profound pity. But overriding it all was a freezing sub-zero aura of drawing a permanent boundary line. I completely ghosted him, offering absolute zero acknowledgement, instead shielding Nyanyan even tighter, tucking her safely behind my back. I pivoted my frame and locked my eyes onto the side, staring dead at Chinmuyan, who stood frozen in place like a lifeless stone statue. Her lips parted slightly as she struggled to form words, her watery, trembling gaze locked onto Nyanyan's small figure, in absolute mind-blowing shock and utter bewilderment. She is genuinely our biological daughter. She attempted to take a fragile step forward, desperately wanting to close the distance and get a clearer scan of Nyanyan. I stepped in with an icy glare blocking her path dead center. And with a single word, I erected an absolute insurmountable wall between us. "Get the hell out." Chinmuyan's frantic footsteps ground to a violent halt. She stared dead at me as her heart was ruthlessly ripped to shreds, her eyes radiating a pathetic, submissive desperation she had never shown before, mingled with an ocean of suffocating, bitter regret. "Yunzhou, I finally know how brutally wrong I was. It was all Pei Hui pulling the toxic strings in the dark. He was the monster who brainwashed Chenchin into framing you. Please, do you still remember? Years ago, you desperately risked your life to rescue a woman trapped in a horrific car crash. That woman was me. I was a blind, arrogant fool. It's entirely my fault. I am so incredibly sorry. I deserve your wrath for failing to recognize my own savior." That ancient nightmare felt entirely too distant now, fading so far away that it felt like a fragmented memory from a past life. I only vaguely recalled dragging a bloody woman to safety, before someone brutally blindsided me, knocking me unconscious on the asphalt. By the time I finally opened my eyes, the only person standing by my side claiming credit was a frantic Pei Hui. As for what cosmic joke of a truth actually happened back then, I no longer had the absolute energy or desire to analyze it. I flat out refused to ever involve myself with that toxic, pathetic past by even a single millimeter. My gaze gently drifted back down to Nyanyan, who was still cradled tightly in my arms, instantly becoming soft, unyielding, and overflowing with the profound ecstasy of recovering my lost child. The only thing that matters to me in this world is my daughter. Your pathetic apologies and performative regret aren't worth a single cent to me. With those final words, I tightly gripped Nyanyan's tiny hand and turned to walk away. "Yunzhou!" Chinmuyan frantically tried to sprint after us, only to be stonewalled by Luo Qingning's personal security team, their faces completely cold and expressionless. Luo Qingning protectively guided us into the heavy luxury car idling by the curb. The thick door slammed shut with a heavy thud, instantly slicing off Chinmuyan's hollow, despairing gaze and Chenchin's agonizing, gut-wrenching wails. The interior of the vehicle was completely dead silent. I stared at this brilliant woman sitting across from me who clearly held all the hidden pieces to this puzzle, and finally broke the silence, my voice incredibly raspy and exhausted. "Can you please explain to me what the hell is actually going on here?" Luo Qingning locked eyes with me, letting out a long, heavy sigh, before she slowly began to unravel the past. Years ago, my parents completely commodified my future, ruthlessly forcing me onto a flight to study abroad. During those grueling years, I completely buried myself in textbooks, insanely starved myself to lose weight, and funneled every ounce of my remaining sanity into transforming myself into a powerhouse. The absolute singular delusion keeping me alive was that I would one day become powerful enough, high status enough to finally stand proudly by your side, so I could sprint back across the world to claim you. She flashed a deeply bitter, self-deprecating smile, her eyes swimming in a nostalgic, melancholic fog. But by the time I finally conquered my studies and touched down in the city, I was brutally hit with the news that you had already wedded Chin Muyan or Kisata, and from the outside you genuinely seemed to be living your absolute best life. That was until the horrific rumor reached my ears that you had been brutally stabbed. By the time I frantically rushed to the emergency ward, you were already completely out of the woods, and Chin Muyan had just given birth to your newborn son. At that exact heartbreaking millisecond, I accepted reality and realized my unspoken, unrequited love finally had to come to a permanent end. But the absolute moment I walked out of the hospital entrance, I unexpectedly caught the sound of a faint, fragile whimper. Her voice instantly softened into an incredibly gentle, tender whisper. Right there in the middle of the freezing sub-zero snowdrift, I discovered a horribly abandoned, defenseless newborn baby girl. She was casually wrapped up in nothing but a piece of dirty, torn rag, her tiny face completely frozen into a sickening shade of purple, and her cries were so incredibly faint that she sounded like a dying kitten. My initial instinct was to mind my own business and just walk away. But that fragile child's facial features looked a shocking amount like a mirror image of you when you were a little boy. She cast her eyes toward me, her gaze completely overflowing with deep warmth. In that exact moment, a profound thought struck me. That maybe, just maybe, this innocent soul was the final piece of comfort the universe was granting me. So I immediately took her back with me to Nanchang, Aichi, and raised her with every ounce of my love as my very own biological daughter. It wasn't until your private investigator started digging into her background that the shocking monumental reality finally hit me. Nianian wasn't just a random orphan, she was actually your true flesh and blood. She gently pushed the confidential document folder across the desk, placing it right before me. The only reason I didn't drop this truth bomb on you right from day one was because I desperately wanted to give both you and Nianian some breathing room, allowing the two of you to naturally bond and organically develop a genuine loving relationship, rather than being forcefully chained together by a cold clinical piece of paper from a DNA lab. With violently trembling fingers, I finally unsealed the official document folder. The paternity test results stated the absolute undeniable truth in stark black and white. Nyanyan was without a shadow of a doubt my own biological daughter. A fresh wave of heavy scorching tears instantly blurred my vision. I slowly looked up at Luo Qingning, this incredible woman who had selflessly and silently protected me from the shadows for so long, who had literally saved my baby girl from the jaws of death, and who had meticulously raised Nianian into such a beautiful, brilliant little angel. A million profound emotions choked up in my throat, ultimately melting away into a singular, deeply raw expression of pure soul-deep gratitude. Qingning, thank you for everything. The weeks that followed transformed into the most profoundly peaceful and ecstatic era of my entire 30-plus years on this earth. The celestial bond between Nianian and me grew exponentially stronger with every passing day. Blood is infinitely thicker than water, and I suppose that ancient proverb captures this cosmic feeling perfectly. Nianian remained incredibly mature and perceptive, and remained incredibly well-behaved Kishat. But whenever she was safely by my side, she slowly began discarding that premature defensive emotional armor she had built, showing more of the pure innocence and dependency that actually belonged to a 6-year-old child. She would cutely tug at my hand to act spoiled, begging me to read her favorite bedtime stories. And whenever I was preparing dinner, she would drag a tiny wooden stool to sit right at the kitchen doorway, watching me bustle about with food, while non-stop chattering and gossiping away about all the hilarious drama happening at her kindergarten. While I was engrossed in reading a book, she would stealthily climb onto my lap, snuggle deeply into my warm chest, and drift off to sleep in a matter of seconds. I poured every single ounce of my soul's affection into her, doing absolutely everything in my power to make up for those 6 agonizing stolen years. As for Luo Qingning, the ultimate savior and guardian angel of my life, I wasn't completely blind or oblivious to the profound depth of her devotion and sacrifices. She was constantly swamped with work, carrying the massive weight of the multi-billion-dollar Luo Corporation entirely on her own shoulders. Yet the absolute second she stepped back inside our home, she would leave all her stress at the door, reserving her entire world of tenderness exclusively for Nianian and me. She meticulously remembered every single dish Nianian loved to eat. And whenever Nianian and I were goofing around, she would just watch us from the side in absolute serenity, a soft, radiant smile playing on her lips. She would regularly cancel high-profile corporate events on the weekends, just to take us out to the countryside for peaceful family picnics, or spend the day running around amusement parks, doing every single wholesome activity that normal, happy families do. She never tried to force anything, and she never once overstepped a single boundary, quietly and gracefully nurturing our father-daughter duo in the most natural, comforting way possible. Slowly but surely, I began to genuinely reciprocate her care, wholeheartedly accepting her pure intentions, and a beautiful, effortless affection began to naturally blossom between us over time. One afternoon, Nyanyan was happily clutching her tablet, watching a viral, heartwarming video of a gorgeous fairy tale wedding. She suddenly blinked her massive, sparkling eyes, asking in a voice full of pure, unadulterated innocence, "Daddy, Mommy." The little toddlers in this video got to walk down the aisle at their parents' wedding. Can Nyanyan please have a magical chance like that too in the future? I instantly froze in shock, while Luo Qingning looked over at me, the brilliant warmth in her eyes deepening exponentially. She gently ruffled Nyanyan's soft hair, whispering with absolute sweetness, "Well, that entirely depends on whether your daddy's willing to make me his wife." My cheeks instantly flushed with a burning, intense heat, and Nyanyan immediately buried her face, covering her tiny mouth as she let out a barrage of giggles, clapped her tiny hands over her mouth, stifling a sneaky little giggle. Outside the window, the golden sunshine streamed in perfectly. But over in Jinhai, across the city, Qin Muyan had completely lost her mind, spiraling into absolute madness. She began recklessly neglecting all her corporate duties, casting her multi-million-dollar business completely to the back of her mind, while Chen was carelessly dumped onto a hired nanny, left entirely neglected and ignored. She dedicated her entire existence to one singular obsessive mission, stalking and camping out right outside our front door, loitering by the kindergarten school gates, and lurking around my office building, exhausting every desperate tactic to scream her frantic apologies, begging, pleading, and weeping bitterly for a second chance, only to be brutally shot down by my persistent cold shoulder and icy dismissive departure. Meanwhile, the psychotic monster she had locked away in her dark basement, Pei Xinghe, who was supposed to be tortured day and night, actually managed to break out during a massive security lapse. With absolutely nowhere left to hide, he covertly stalked his way over to Chenchen's school, ambushing the boy during dismissal and violently kidnapping him. Initially, Chen fought back with intense, aggressive resistance, screaming profanities and biting his captor's hands, until Pei Xinghe locked eyes with him, his pupils dilated with pure unhinged insanity, whispering like a manipulative demon straight from hell, "Chen, don't you desperately want mommy to look at you and only love you again? To treat you like her one and only precious angel, just like the good old days?" Chen violently froze mid-struggle, his entire soul profoundly aching for the past, craving the high-status attention he used to get from everyone, longing to be completely spoiled and coddled, reminiscing about the golden days when he was the absolute center of the universe. He vigorously nodded his tiny head, and a sick, twisted grin slowly crept across Pei Xinghui's face. "Then let daddy teach you the ultimate trick. Right now, mommy's entire brain is hyperfixated on that useless father-daughter duo, but the exact second you end up brutally injured, mommy's heart will shatter into a million pieces for you. She'll go completely frantic with worry, and she will immediately fall back in love with you." Is that really true?" Chen asked in absolute naive innocence, his tear-stained little face completely lighting up with desperate hope. "Of course it is," Pei Xinghui muttered as genuine fatherly tears welled up in his eyes for the very first time. He knew with absolute certainty that he was completely ruined and once blacklisted, that Qin Muyan would never throw him a single crumb of affection again, and that his own pathetic life had officially hit a dead end. But he was determined to gamble his final breath to secure a lucrative future for his biological son. "All you have to do is precisely execute daddy's master plan." When the weekend arrived, Luo Qingning and I took Nyanyan to a luxury mall to enjoy some rare blissful family time. The absolute second we stepped through the main exit of the shopping center, Qin Muyan, who had been covertly stalking the perimeter for hours, abruptly materialized out of thin air once again. She looked absolutely ghastly, physically withered beyond recognition, clutching two elaborate floral bouquets in her trembling hands, one explicitly meant for me and the other, intricately prepared for Nyanyan. "Yunzhou, Nyanyan." I was so incredibly tragically wrong. She desperately blurted out her pathetic submissive apology for the millionth time, her voice completely raspy and cracked. I immediately cut her off, my tone radiating pure unadulterated disgust, as I flat out refused to cast even a single glance in her direction. "Qin Muyan, I have already made myself crystal clear. Stop harassing us with your utterly pathetic, useless desperation." But at that exact heart-stopping millisecond, a tiny familiar figure on the opposite side of the asphalt suddenly bolted directly toward us, sprinting at breakneck speed while screaming at the top of his lungs, his voice completely overflowing with frantic urgency and desperate hope. Daddy, it was none other than Chen. And then a deeply horrifying apocalyptic nightmare unfolded right before our eyes. An ancient battered sedan idling by the curb suddenly roared to life, aggressively accelerating as it veered directly toward Chen while he was sprinting across the street. Behind the steering wheel, Pei Xinghui's eyes were completely bloodshot and manic. His unhinged gaze locked dead onto the sprinting silhouette of his own son. He desperately needed to mathematically calculate the velocity and impact force. Ensuring Chen would only sustain a controlled, non-fatal injury, just enough to violently shatter Qin Muyan's heart with maternal agony, and forcefully redirect her entire attention back onto her one and only biological son. But the exact moment Chen was mere inches away from the bumper, and Pei Xinghui slammed his foot down to engage the brakes. He was hit with absolute paralyzing horror as he realized this illegal black market scrap car had a completely blown, completely non-functional braking system. Qin Muyan's gut-wrenching, blood-curdling shriek and my own gasp of sheer terror erupted simultaneously as a sickening, deafening impact echoed through the air. Chen's fragile tiny body was violently launched into the air by the catastrophic impact, flying across the sky like a broken severed kite tracing a horrific arc before violently smashing down onto the unforgiving rock-hard asphalt over 10 meters away, tumbling violently across the pavement multiple times, until he lay there completely paralyzed and dead silent. A pool of dark coppery blood instantaneously erupted from beneath his body, spreading rapidly, painting the street in a gruesome, terrifying crimson as time itself ground to a violent halt. Pei Xinghui completely collapsed out of the driver's side door, frantically scrambling onto the pavement, staring at his innocent son lying motionless in a rapidly expanding pool of fresh blood. His entire sanity instantaneously fracturing into absolute nothingness. He stumbled and dragged his weight across the street, throwing himself down, dropping heavily onto his knees right beside Chen's broken body, desperately aching to cradle him, yet paralyzingly terrified to even brush against him as both his hands shook and convulsed out of control, his lips frantically whispering incoherent, fragmented words, in a voice that was completely shattered into raw, agonizing pieces. Completely shattered and utterly broken beyond repair. Chen, my precious Chen, Daddy didn't mean to do this. The brakes failed. The brakes were totally broken. Qin Muyan frantically bolted over her hands, convulsing violently, as she scooped up her son's mangled, blood-drenched body. Chen's eyelids were only halfway open, his glossed-over pupils already completely dilated and lifeless, and his tiny face still retained the warm flush from sprinting toward me, even though his breathing had entirely ceased. Chen, please force your eyes open and look at Mommy. Chen, Qin Muyan's voice was completely pulverized, radiating a gut-wrenching, agonizing shriek of pure despair. She violently whipped her head up to glare at the paralyzed, ghost-faced Pei Xinghui, who was slouched on the concrete. She gently laid her deceased son down, stood up on trembling legs, and marched toward him one deliberate, lethal step at a time. Right under his absolutely petrified, terror-stricken gaze, she loaded up a vicious, heavy punch and smashed it directly into his face. You absolute demon! Even a ruthless beast wouldn't slaughter its own flesh and blood. The raw impact instantly shattered Pei Xinghui's nose, sending crimson blood spraying across his entire face. Yet he seemed completely immune to the excruciating physical agony, staring blankly and hollowly at Chen's lifeless corpse in the distance, muttering the exact same phrase over and over again, like a completely unhinged psycho. I didn't mean to do it. The brakes were blown. My precious Chen. The piercing wail of police sirens rapidly intensified from the distance. Pei Xinghui was ruthlessly pinned and dragged into the back of a squad car by the arriving officers, doomed to face the absolute merciless hammer of the law, alongside the eternal self-inflicted living hell of his own making. Qin Muyan collapsed heavily back onto her knees right beside Chen's corpse, this exact woman who was once incredibly arrogant high status, and carried herself like a completely untouchable royal billionaire heiress. Now looked as if her entire skeletal frame had been brutally ripped out of her body. She cradled her son's rapidly cooling tiny physical frame, throwing her head back toward the heavens, as she unleashed a primitive, agonizing howl into the bleak gray sky. A few meters away, Nyanyan was utterly traumatized by this horrific bloody spectacle. She cowered protectively behind Luo Qingning's silhouette, her tiny fingers fiercely white-knuckling her hand, her face completely drained of all color. She hesitated for a split second, before gently releasing her grip on Luo Qingning's hand, and walking directly over to where Qin Muyan was collapsing. Right under Qin Muyan's vacant, completely hollowed-out stare, the sweet girl unbuttoned her own tiny winter coat, and delicately draped it over Chen's mangled, blood-stained body. Auntie, please don't cry so hard. That pure angelic act of unconditional empathy was the ultimate crushing blow that completely broke Qin Muyan's psyche. She buried her face in her hands, her entire body convulsing as she wept uncontrollably, wailing until her breath completely failed her. Chen's remains were brought back to Jinhai by Qin Muyan, and the funeral was brutally brief, empty, and chillingly desolate. She didn't reach out to a single soul, choosing instead to cradle his funeral urn all by herself, as she returned to that now haunted, echoing void. The luxury estate that used to be called their blissful family villa. She slumped directly onto the cold living room floor, surrounded by Chenchen's scattered, untouched toys, while the family portrait they had taken years ago still loomed on the wall. In that dynamic photograph, I was flashing a soft, radiant smile, holding a baby Chenchen who had just learned how to laugh in my arms. She was seated right by my side, her slender hand locked firmly around my forearm, her head leaning gently against my shoulder. And they looked so completely picture perfect, so overwhelmingly flawlessly happy. She slowly reached up and took down that framed portrait, her trembling fingers lightly brushing across my smiling face in the picture. Once upon a time, a pure unconditional love had been laid right at her feet, yet she had ruthlessly discarded and failed to protect it. Now her entire household was permanently fractured. Her only biological son was tragically dead, and the man she desperately loved now detested her to his absolute core, treating her as nothing more than invisible, worthless dust. If the universe could just grant her one more chance, she would absolutely never repeat those horrific, toxic mistakes. But tragically, there were no second chances. The damage was entirely done, the die was cast, and absolutely everything was completely beyond salvation. Enveloped by the encroaching darkness, she pulled out a sleek silver lighter. With a sharp click, a ghostly blue flame danced to life, which she casually tossed onto the edge of the heavy drapes. The hungry flames instantaneously spread like wildfire, viciously licking up the curtains, the walls, and the expensive furniture. She sat perfectly still right in the epicenter of the roaring inferno, her face radiating an unprecedented eerie serenity and the pure relief of final liberation. Maybe this is for the best. At least this way, our family can finally be reunited, letting the blazing fire draw a permanent lethal period on all her sins and catastrophic mistakes. A few days later, I finally walked out of the hospital gate, and my medical checkup results were absolutely flawless. My physical wounds had pretty much completely healed. The absolute second I stepped back into the house, Lo Qingning handed me an urgent overnight express courier envelope, sent directly from Jinhai's most elite top-tier law firm. Inside was a fully notarized, legally binding last will and testament, along with a thick stack of finalized, fully executed asset transfer deeds. Qin Muyan had signed over her absolute entire net worth. Every single share of the Qin Corporation, her luxury real estate properties, trust funds, and high-end art collections. Absolutely everything was bequeathed directly to Nianian and me. Tucked neatly inside the legal documents was a small handwritten sticky note, bearing Qin Muyan's distinct familiar penmanship. There were only a few brief sentences pendanced down, yet the ink was heavily smeared and distorted by what were clearly her fallen tears, making the text incredibly blurred and barely legible. Yunzhou, Nian Nian. I am so deeply, truly sorry. This is the absolute last insignificant shred of compensation I can possibly offer you. May your lives be blessed with eternal peace, pure happiness, and never be plagued by heavy storms ever again. Clutching that final will and testament in my hands, my chest was filled with an absolute echoing void. There was no lingering hatred left, nor was there any sudden forgiveness. Just a detached, distant sigh for a chaotic past that had finally burned to ash. Lo Qingning gracefully stepped up to my side, gently linking her arm through mine to comfort me, before she softly leaned down to tenderly ask the little girl standing beside us, Nian Nian, "Do you want to go back and say your final goodbye to your birth mother? One last time." Nian Nian blinked her big innocent eyes up at her, then shifted her gaze over to look at me, before fiercely throwing her tiny arms around both of us. "Mommy, you're being silly." "You're confused? You are the only true mommy I have." She extended her little hands tightly, interlinking her fingers with mine and Luo Qingning's. "Nian Nian isn't going anywhere else. Our family is going to stay together like this for the rest of eternity." Outside the window, Nanchang's pristine afternoon sunshine beamed perfectly through the crystal clear glass, casting a beautiful radiant warmth over our tightly embraced family of three. The deep jagged scars of the past might never completely vanish from our souls, but a brand new chapter, a life overflowing with genuine love and infinite hope, had already quietly blossomed. The chaotic dust had finally settled, and the rest of our days would be absolute unbroken peace.